village. In the very same way, O king, the ascetic, when his mind is pure, knows his former births. He thinks, in such a place I had such a name. I was born in such a family, such was my caste, such was my food, and in such a way I experienced pleasure and pain, and my life extended through in some other place, and there also I had such and such conditions. Thence removed, the same I am now born here. This question shows very clearly the doctrine of the Buddha with regard to the reincarnating ego. He gives illustrations also in the same sutta of the manner in which an ascetic can know the past births of others, how he can see them die in one place, and after the sorrows and joys of hell and heaven the same men are born again somewhere else. It is true that in the Brahmajala Sutta he mentions all the various aspects of the soul, and says that they do not absolutely exist, because their existence depends upon contact, that is to say upon relation. But in thus denying the absolute reality of the soul he agrees with the other great Indian teachers, for the existence not only of the soul but even of the Logos himself is true only relatively. Untrained minds frequently misunderstand these ideas, but the careful student of Oriental thought will not fail to grasp exactly what is meant, and to realize that the teaching of the Buddha in this respect is exactly that now given by Theosophy. It is not difficult to see how various texts might be so emphasized or distorted as to seem to contradict one another. And the Southern Church has chosen to cling rather to the denial of the permanence of the personality than to the assertion of the continuity of the individuality. Just as in Christianity some people have acquired the habit of laying stress on particular texts, and ignoring others which contradict them. Another point as to which there is a very similar misunderstanding is the constantly repeated assertion that nirvana is equivalent to annihilation. Even Max Muller, the great Oxford Sanskritist, was under this delusion for many years, but later in his life with further and deeper study he came to understand that in this he had been mistaken. The description which the Lord Buddha himself gives to nirvana is so far above the comprehension of any man who is trained only in ordinary and worldly methods of thought that it is little wonder that it should have been misunderstood at first sight by the European Orientalists. But no one who has lived in the East among the Buddhists can for a moment suppose that they regard annihilation as the end which they are striving to reach. It is quite true that the attaining of nirvana does involve the utter annihilation of that lower side of man which is in truth all that we know of him at the present time. The personality, like everything connected with the lower vehicles, is impermanent and will disappear. If we endeavor to realize what man would be when deprived of all which is included under these terms, we shall see that for us at our present stage it would be difficult to comprehend that anything remained. And yet the truth is that everything remains, that in the glorified spirit which then exists, all the essence of all the qualities which have been developed through the centuries of strife and stress in earthly incarnation will inhere to the fullest possible degree. The man has become more than man, since he is now on the threshold of divinity, yet he is still himself, even though it be a so much wider self. Many definitions have been given of nirvana, and naturally none of them can possibly be satisfactory. Perhaps the best on the whole is that of peace in omniscience. Many years ago when I was preparing a simple introductory catechism of their religion for Buddhist children, the chief abbot Sumangala himself gave me as the best definition of nirvana to put before them that it was a condition of peace and blessedness so high above our present state that it was impossible for us to understand it. Surely that is far removed from the idea of annihilation. Truly all that we now call the man has disappeared, but that is not because the individuality is annihilated, but because it is lost in divinity. The Buddha himself once said, "Nirvana is not being, but also it is not non-being." Another difference between the Northern Church of Buddhism and the Southern is that they adopt different version of the scriptures. It is usually stated that the Northern Church adopts the Mahayana and the Southern the Hinayana, but whether even this much may be safely said depends upon the shade of meaning which we attach to a much disputed word. Yana means vehicle, and it is agreed that it is to be applied to the Dhamma or law, as the vessel which conveys us across the sea of life to nirvana, but there are at least 5 theories as to the exact sense in which it is to be taken. 1. That it refers simply to the language in which the law is written, the greater vehicle being by this hypothesis Sanskrit, and the lesser vehicle Pali, a theory which seems to me untenable. It is true that the Northern Church uses the Sanskrit translation, while the Southern scriptures are in Pali, the language which the Lord Buddha spoke when on earth. It is stated that the Pali scriptures which we now possess are not in the original form, but that all the originals existing, in Ceylon at least, were carefully destroyed by the Tamil invaders. So that the Pali scriptures which we now have are a retranslation made from a copy in Elu, then the vernacular language of Ceylon. 2. Hina may apparently be taken as signifying mean or easy, as well as small. One interpretation therefore considers that the Hinayana is the meaner or easier road to liberation, the irreducible minimum of knowledge and conduct required to attain it, while the Mahayana is the fuller and more philosophical doctrine, which includes much traditional knowledge about higher realms of nature. Needless to say, this interpretation comes from a Mahayana source. 3. That Buddhism, in its unfailing courtesy towards other religions, accepts them all as ways to liberation, though it regards the method taught by its founder as offering the shortest and surest route. According to this view, Buddhism is the Mahayana, and the Hinayana includes Brahmanism, Zoroastrianism, Jainism, and any other religions which were existing at the time when the definition was formulated. 4. That the two doctrines are simply two stages of one doctrine, the Hinayana for the Sravakas or hearers, and the Mahayana for more advanced students. 5. That the word yana is to be understood not exactly in its primary sense of vehicle, but rather in its secondary sense, nearly equivalent to the English word career. According to this interpretation, the Mahayana puts before the man the grand career of becoming a bodhisattva and devoting himself to the welfare of the world, while the Hinayana shows him only the smaller career of so living as to attain nirvana for himself. There has also been much discussion as to the exact meaning of the terms Adibuddha and Avalokiteshvara. I have made no special study of these things from the philosophical standpoint, but so far as I have been able to gather ideas from discussion of the matter with the living exponents of the religion, Adibuddha seems to be the culmination of one of the great lines of superhuman development, what might be called the abstract principle of all the Buddhas. Avalokiteshvara is a term belonging to the Northern Church, and seems to be the Buddhists' name for their conception of the Logos. European scholars have translated it, the Lord who looks down from on high, but this seems to have in it a somewhat inaccurate implication, for it is clearly always the manifested Logos. Sometimes the Logos of a solar system and sometimes higher than that, but always manifest. We must not forget that while the founders of the great religions see and know the things which they name, their followers usually do not see. They have only the names, and they juggle with them as intellectual counters, and build up much which is incorrect and inconsistent. The Buddhism of the Southern Church, which includes Ceylon, Burma, Siam and Cambodia, has on the whole kept its religion free from the accretions which have become so prominent in the northern division of Japan, China and Tibet. In Burma no image appears in the temples except that of the Buddha, though of him there are in some cases hundreds of images, of different material, in different positions, presented by various worshippers. In Ceylon a certain concession seems to have been made to popular feeling, or perhaps to a foreign government during the time of the Tamil kings, for the images of certain Hindu deities are often to be seen in the temples, though they are always placed in a subordinate position and considered as a kind of attendance upon the Buddha. We need not however blame the Tibetans very much for the fact that certain superstitions have crept into their Buddhism. The same thing happens in all countries and with all religions, as time goes on. In Italy, for example, numbers of the peasants in the hills still follow what they call the old religion, and continue even in the present day the worship of Bacchus, under an Etruscan name which antedates even the time of the Roman Empire. The Catholic priests quite recognized the existence of this older faith, and set themselves against it, but without avail. In Southern Buddhism there is remarkably little ceremony of any kind, practically nothing indeed that in any way corresponds to the Christian service. When the people pay their morning visit to the temple they usually call upon the monks to recite for them the 3 guides and the 5 precepts, which they then repeat after him, but even this can hardly be called a public service. For it is recited not once at a set time, but for each group of people as they happen to arrive. There is another ceremony called Purita or Pirit, which means blessings, but this is not performed in the temple itself nor at any stated times. But it is considered a good work on the part of the laity to celebrate any special occasion by giving a Pirit ceremony, that is to say by erecting and elaborately decorating a temporary building in which the ceremony is held. It consists of the chanting of benedictory verses from the sacred scriptures, and is carried on for a certain number of days, usually a fortnight, by relays of monks who relieve one another every 2 hours. Sometimes when a man falls ill, one of these Pirit ceremonies is arranged for him, with the idea that it will promote his recovery. It is in reality a mesmeric ceremony, for the monks sit in a circle and hold in their hands a rope which runs round the circle, and they are instructed to recite their texts, keeping clearly in their minds all the time the will to bless. Naturally this rope becomes very strongly magnetized as the ceremony progresses, and strings run from it to a huge pot of water, which of course also becomes highly charged with magnetism. At the conclusion of the ceremony this water is distributed among the people, and the sick man often holds a thread which is connected with the rope. The Southern Buddhists give a list of 5 psychic powers which may be gained by the man who is making progress on the path. 1. The ability to pass through the air and through solid objects, and to visit the heaven world while still alive. It is however possible that this may mean nothing more than ability to function freely in the astral body, because it is quite likely that in speaking of the heaven world they do not really mean the mental plane, but only the higher levels of the astral. 2. Divinely clear hearing, which is evidently merely the astral faculty of clairaudience. 3. The ability to comprehend and sympathize with all that is in the minds of others, which appears to be thought reading, or perhaps telepathy. 4. The power to remember former births. 5. Divinely clear vision, that is to say, clairvoyance. To this is added in some lists the attainment of deliverance by wisdom. This must of course mean the attainment of freedom from the necessity of rebirth, but it does not seem to be of the same nature as the other powers, and perhaps should hardly appear in the same category. Ananda is said to have been the favorite disciple of the Lord Buddha, just as John is spoken of as the beloved disciple of the Christ, and no doubt in both cases the special intimacy was the result of relationship in previous lives. Ananda was certainly not so chosen because he was the most advanced, for even after the death of the Buddha we hear that when the first great council was held in a cave within the living rock, and the condition of taking part in it was that none should enter who could not pass through the rock, Ananda found himself shut out from it because he had not yet attained this power. But it is said that his grief at this exclusion from a grand opportunity of serving his departed master was so great that by a supreme effort of will he then and there developed the power which had been lacking, and passed in triumphantly to take his place among his brothers, though a little late. This shows us that even those who are the most highly advanced of all humanity have still their special friendships, and that therefore to love one person more than another cannot be improper. It is true that such affection as you now feel for your nearest and dearest you will feel later on for the whole world, but at that time you will feel 1,000 times more affection for those who are nearest to you. Your love will never be the same for all, although all will be included within it. It is impossible that we should feel towards another as we do towards our master, for when he becomes a logos we shall be part of his system, and even when far later on we ourselves become logoi we shall still be part of him. For he will represent some far greater system. Although there will always be greater love for some than others, we shall help those whom we love less just as fully as those whom we love more. We shall always do our best for all, just as a doctor equally helps his patient whether he be a friend or not, for anything like dislike or hatred will have ceased eons before. At the time of the Lord Buddha many other spiritual teachers were sent forth to the world. We find for example Lao Tse, Confucius and Pythagoras, all working in their different spheres. Advantage was taken of the stupendous outpouring of spiritual force at the time to send forth teachers into many parts of the world. Christianity. There is nothing in the principles of theosophy which is at all in opposition to the true primitive Christianity, though there may be statements which cannot be reconciled with some of the mistakes of modern popular theology. This modern theology attaches immense importance to texts, in fact it appears to me to be based upon one or two texts almost entirely. It takes these and gives to them a particular interpretation, often in direct opposition to the plain meaning of other texts from the same Bible. Of course there are contradictions in the Christian scripture just as there must necessarily be in any book of that size, the various parts of which were written at such widely separated periods of the world's history, and by people so unequal in knowledge and in civilization. It is impossible that all the statements made in it can be literally true, but we can go back behind them all, and try to find out what the original teacher did lay before his pupils. Since there are many contradictions and many interpretations, it is obviously the duty of a thinking Christian to weigh carefully the different versions of his faith which exist in the world, and decide between them according to his own reason and common sense. Every Christian does, as a matter of fact, decide for himself now. He chooses to be a Roman Catholic, or a member of the Church of England, or a Methodist, or a Salvationist, though each of these sects professes to have the only genuine brand of Christianity, and justifies its claim by the quotation of texts. How then does the ordinary layman decide between their rival claims? Either he accepts blindly the faith which his father held, and does not examine the matter at all, or else he does examine it, and then he decides by the exercise of his own judgment. If he is already doing that, it would be absurd and inconsistent for him to refuse to examine all texts, instead of basing his belief only upon one or two. If he does impartially examine all texts, he will certainly find many which support theosophical truth. He will find also that the creeds can be rationally interpreted only by theosophy. Of course, in order to make an intelligent comparison between these different systems, it will be necessary for him to make some inquiries into the history of his own religion, and to see how the Christian doctrine came to be what it now is. He will find that in the early Christian church there were three principal divisions or parties. There were first of all the Gnostic doctors or teachers, wise and cultured men who held that the Christian church had its system of philosophy of the same nature as the great Greek and Roman systems which existed at that time. They said that this system, while thoroughly comprehensive and very beautiful, was difficult to understand, and therefore they did not recommend its study to the ignorant. They spoke of it as the gnosis or knowledge, the knowledge which was possessed by those who were full members of the church, but was not given out to the world at large, and not even told to the more ignorant members of the church while they were in that preliminary stage when they could not receive the sacraments. Then there was the second division, a body of respectable middle-class people, who troubled themselves not at all about the philosophy, but simply were content to take the words of the Christ as their guide in life. They used as a sacred book a collection of his sayings, some leaves of which have recently been discovered by antiquarians. Then there was unfortunately a great mass of ignorant and turbulent people who never had any grasp whatever of Christian doctrine, but became members of the church merely because of the prophecies, given by the Christ, of a good time to come. He was very much moved by the sufferings of the poor, and full of compassion and pity for them. He told them constantly, in his teachings, to take comfort, because the poor man who endures the struggle bravely and well will in the future have a better position and greater advancement than the rich man who misuses his opportunities. One can readily see how that doctrine preached to an exceedingly ignorant people might be taken in a one-sided manner. They would take the promises and not the conditions, and their idea of that good time might easily be that they in turn would be the oppressors and would take advantage of the rich man, something which of course the Christ never preached. So it came to pass that he attracted to himself a great crowd of men who for various reasons were against the existing government. And when these ignorant people in turn preached what they called Christianity to others, they naturally intensified and exaggerated their own misconceptions of it. This great mass of the common people, who called themselves the poor men, speedily became a vast majority of the infant church, and gained so much power that they were eventually able to throw out the Gnostic doctors as heretics. For the poor men resented the idea that any knowledge which they did not possess could be regarded as an essential part of Christianity. There is yet another point of view from which the Christian may find theosophy of the greatest use to him. Just now the minds of many Orthodox Christians are much exercised with regard to what they call the higher criticism, that is, The attempt to apply ordinary common sense and scientific methods to the examination of the religious teaching, the endeavor to understand religion instead of blindly believing it. For many ages the world has been told that ecclesiastical dogmas must be swallowed like pills, and that to attempt to reason about them is impious. There are many men in the world, and they are among the most intellectual of its citizens, who simply cannot accept doctrines thus blindly and uncomprehendingly. Before they can believe they must to some extent understand, and a statement does not become a living fact to them until they can relate it rationally to other facts, and regard it as part of a more or less comprehensive scheme of things. It is ridiculous to say, as some of the orthodox do, that these people are inherently wicked and that their attitude is inspired by the devil. On the contrary, they are precisely the men who truly appreciate God's great gift of reason, and are determined to employ it in the highest of all possible directions, for the elucidation of the truth about religion. The truth is that the critics are of the greatest possible service to religion. They are clearing up points in it which heretofore have been vague. They are stating with accuracy matters in connection with it which were previously very partially understood. They are trying to make a reasonable system out of what has until now been nothing but a mass of meaningless confusion. If any of our members have orthodox friends who are disturbed by these efforts, who fear lest this liberalizing and rationalizing of their faith should refine it altogether out of existence, let them recommend to them the teachings of Theosophy. For that is the very thing which they need. It will teach them to pause before throwing aside ancestral belief, and it will show them that when properly understood that belief has a real meaning and a real foundation, and that, while some of the vagaries of medieval ecclesiastical dogma may be incomprehensible and incredible, the original teaching of the Christ was a magnificent presentment of universal truth. If they have somewhat outgrown the outer form of their religion, if they have broken through the chrysalis of blind faith, and mounted on the wings of reason and intuition to the freer, nobler mental life of more exalted levels, Theosophy will show them that in all this there has been no loss, but a great and glorious gain. For it tells them that the glow of devotion which has meant so much to them in their spiritual life is more than justified. That the splendor and beauty and poetry of religious thought exist in fuller measure than they have ever hoped before, no longer as mere pleasant dreams from which the cold light of common sense may at any time rudely awaken them, but as truths of nature which will bear investigation, which become only brighter and more perfect as they are more accurately understood. Certainly the Christian Bible ought not to be taken literally, for many of its statements are symbolical, and others are simply not true. When we examine clairvoyantly the life of the founder of Christianity, for example, we can find no trace of the alleged 12 apostles. It would seem that as men they never existed, but that they were introduced into the story for some reason, possibly to typify the 12 signs of the zodiac. The disciple Jesus, whose body was taken by the Christ, was not an illegitimate son, as is implied in the Gospel, nor was his father a carpenter. He was in reality of the highest aristocracy of the Jews, a descendant of their own old royal line. He may however have had a tinge of Aryan blood in him, which would be quite enough to cause the exclusive Jews to say that he was not legitimately of the seed of David. And that statement might very easily be taken to mean such an irregular birth as is suggested by the narrative. The truth is that the 4 Gospels at any rate were never intended to be taken as in any sense historical. They are all founded upon a much shorter document written in Hebrew by a monk named Matthias, who lived in a monastery in a desert to the south of Palestine. He seems to have conceived the idea of casting some of the great facts of initiation into a narrative form and mingling with it some points out of the life of the real Jesus who was born 105 B.C. and some from the life of another quite obscure fanatical preacher, who had been condemned to death and executed in Jerusalem about 30 AD. He sent this document to a great friend of his who was the chief abbot of a huge monastery at Alexandria, and suggested to him that he, or some of his assistants, might perhaps recast it, and issue it in the Greek language. The Alexandrian abbot seems to have employed a number of his young monks upon this work, allowing each of them to try the task for himself, and to treat it in his own way. A number of documents of very varying merit were thus produced, each incorporating in his story more or less of the original manuscript of Matthias, but each also adding to it such legends as he happened to know, or as his taste and fancy dictated. 4 of these still survive to us, and to them are attached the names of the monks who wrote them, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. The splendid passage with which the Gospel of St. John opens was not original but quoted, for we found it in existence many years before the time of the Christ in a manuscript which was even then of hoary antiquity. It was associated in that manuscript with a quotation from the stanzas of Zion, this latter also being translated into Greek. Sin. You ask what is the real meaning of sin? In the sense in which the word is ordinarily employed, at least by Christian preachers, I think sin may be defined as a figment of the theological imagination. It is popularly supposed to indicate a defiance of divine law, the performance of some action which the actor knows to be wrong. It is exceedingly doubtful whether this phenomenon ever occurs. In almost every conceivable case man breaks the law through ignorance or heedlessness, and not of deliberate intention. When once a man really knows and sees the divine intention he inevitably comes into harmony with it, for 2 reasons, at an earlier stage because he sees the utter futility of doing otherwise, and later because, seeing the glory and beauty of the design, he cannot but throw himself into its execution with all the powers of his heart and soul. One of the most serious of the many misconceptions which we have inherited from the Dark Ages is that what is called sin is a perversity to be met with punishment and savage persecution, instead of what it really is. The result of a condition of ignorance that can only be dealt with by enlightenment and education. It may be objected that in daily life we constantly see people doing what they must know to be wrong, but this is a misstatement of the case. They are doing what they have been told is wrong, which is quite a different matter. If a man really knows that an action is wrong, and that it will inevitably be followed by evil consequences, he is careful to avoid it. A man really knows that fire will burn him, therefore he does not put his hand into it. He has been told that the fire of hell will burn him as the result of a certain action, say playing cards on a Sunday, but he does not really know this. And therefore when he feels the inclination to play cards he does so in spite of the threatened consequences. It will be found that everyone who does wrong justifies the wrong action to himself at the time of its commission, whatever he may think about it afterwards in cold blood. So I say that sin as ordinarily understood is a figment of the theological imagination. What really exists is an unfortunate condition of ignorance which often leads to infraction of the divine law. This ignorance it is our duty to endeavor to dispel by the light of theosophy. The Pope. A magnificent opportunity is waiting for the Pope who shall be ready and brave enough to take it. Instead of fulminating rescripts and bulls against theosophy and liberalism, he might himself propound the theosophical interpretation of Christianity. Remember that the Catholic Church possesses what is called the doctrine of development, and also that it has proclaimed the Pope to be the infallible exponent of divine doctrine, the vicegerent of God upon earth. He would therefore be perfectly within his rights if, with regard to the theosophical interpretation, he should pronounce quite boldly. Certainly this which you bring forward is the true meaning of Christian doctrine. We have always known this, and we have plenty of manuscripts in the Vatican Library to prove it. We did not tell you this before, because all through the ages until now men have not been fit for such a revelation. They have been too crude, too rough, too undeveloped to understand a philosophical and mystical interpretation. The outer husk of the religion has been all that could usefully be offered to them. Now one stage more has been attained and the world is ready for this further revelation. The second and inner meaning of our doctrine is therefore put before you, and while we must not condemn those who are still at the stage when they must cling to the outer husk, neither must they on their part be allowed to condemn those who are ready to take the further step and to receive a higher illumination. But of course he must indeed be a strong as well as a wise man who should do this, for like all other great personages the Pope is surrounded by enormous masses of thought forms. And he would find it a matter of extreme difficulty to break through these and make a new departure. Ceremonial. The line of ceremonial is one along which many people come, but of course it must be understood that no religious ceremonial whatever is ever really essential. And the man who wishes to enter upon the path of holiness must realize this fully and must cast off belief in the necessity of ceremonies, as one of the fetters which hold him back from nirvana. This does not mean that ceremonies may not be sometimes quite effective in producing the results which are intended, but only that they are never really necessary for any one. And that the candidate for higher progress must learn to do utterly without them. The ceremonial line is an easy road for a certain type of people, and is really helpful and uplifting for them, but there is another type of men who always feel ceremonial as an obstacle between themselves and the deities which they wish to reach. In Christianity, this ceremonial line is the one appointed by its founder, through which his magic is to work. The consecration of the host, for example, is a means by which spiritual force is poured out over the people. There is often a vast amount of devotional feeling at the moment of the consecration, and the working of the magic is assisted by that, though it does not depend upon it. Those who are devotional unquestionably receive more because they bring with them an additional faculty of reception. On the other hand, there is always the probability that ignorant devotion will degenerate into superstition. In a recent inquiry into these matters from the occult point of view, made in Sicily, I found that there was certainly plenty of superstition, and much harmful interference in family matters on the part of the priests. But still, on the whole, the country was distinctly better than it would have been without it. We should remember also that in history we usually hear much of the worst effects of religious enthusiasm, whereas the good steady progress of many thousands under its influence makes but little impression. Prayer. It is difficult to say anything on the question of prayer that would be universally applicable, because there are such very different kinds of prayer and they are addressed to beings who differ very widely in evolution. The founders of most great religions never in any way encouraged their followers to pray to them, and as a rule the latter have been far too enlightened to do anything of the kind. Whether a very strong thought directed towards them would reach them or not would depend upon the line of evolution which they have since followed, in fact upon whether they still remain within touch of this earth or not. If they were still so within reach, and if such a thought did reach them, it is probable that if they saw that it would be good for the thinker that any notice should be taken, they would turn in his direction the attention of some of their pupils who are still upon earth. But it is quite inconceivable that a man who had any sort of conception of the magnificent far-reaching work done for evolution by the great ones on higher planes could dream of intruding his own petty concerns upon their notice. He could not but know that any kind of help that he required would be far more fitly given to him by someone nearer to his own level. Even down here on this physical plane we are wiser than that, for we do not waste the time of the greatest scholars of our universities in helping babies over the difficulties of the alphabet. As regards the saints of any of the churches the position is different, though even with them the ability to hear prayers will depend upon their position in evolution. The ordinary saint, who is simply a good and holy man, will of course take his heaven life as usual, and will probably take a long one. His life on the astral plane would be likely to be but short, and it would be only during that it would be possible for a prayer to reach him and attract his attention. If during that time it did so reach him, no doubt he would do anything that he could to satisfy the petitioner, but it is by no means certain that it would attract his attention, for he would naturally be fully occupied with his new surroundings. When he entered upon his long rest in the heaven world he would be entirely beyond any possibility of being disturbed by earthly things, yet even in such a case a prayer to him might not be without effect in connection with him. Such a man would almost certainly be pouring out a constant stream of loving thought towards humanity, and this thought would be a real and potent shower of blessing, tending generally towards the spiritual helping of those upon whom it fell. And there is no doubt that the man who was earnestly thinking of or praying to that saint would come into rapport with him, and would therefore draw down upon himself a great deal of that force, though entirely without the knowledge of the saint from whom it came. If the saint were sufficiently advanced to have entered upon a special series of births rapidly following one another, the case would be different again. He would then be all the time within reach of earth, either living on the astral plane or in incarnation upon the physical, and if the prayer were strong enough to attract his attention at any time when he was for a moment out of his body, he would probably give any help in his power. But fortunately for the many thousands who are constantly pouring forth their souls in prayer, in the blindest ignorance, of course, but still in perfect good faith, there is something else to depend upon which is independent of all these considerations. Sri Krishna tells us, in the Bhagavad Gita, how all true prayers come to him, to whomsoever they may have been ignorantly offered. There is a consciousness wide enough to comprehend all, which never fails in its response to any earnest effort in the direction of an increased spirituality. It works through many means. Sometimes perhaps by directing the attention of a deva to the suppliant, sometimes through the agency of those human helpers who work upon the astral or mental planes for the good of humanity. Such a deva or helper so used would, if he showed himself, inevitably be taken by the petitioner for the saint to whom he had prayed, and there are many stories which illustrate this. I myself, for example, have been taken under such circumstances for S. Philip Neri, and a junior helper who was with me on the occasion was supposed to be S. Stanislaus Kostka. Our president, too, has more than once been regarded as an angel by those whom she was assisting. The devil. The devil is non-existent. There are persons who imagine themselves to have made pacts with him, sometimes signed with their own blood. The result depends largely upon what sort of entity happened to personate him for the occasion. There are plenty of creatures of various sorts who would hugely enjoy such a joke at the expense of a man. But no such entity, whatever he may be, could possibly have any use for the soul of a man, nor would the soul of anybody foolish enough to make such a compact be likely to be of any use either to the owner or anybody else. All these absurd superstitions are disproved by the fact that the man is the ego, and therefore cannot sell himself, and also that there are no buyers in such a transaction, so the whole thing is nothing but foolishness. There are many entities who may be both willing and able to arrange 20 years of material prosperity for a person. They are generally willing to do it in return for some material consideration, such as the sacrifice of babies, goats or fowls. The ego has no share in these pacts, either in the rare individual cases, or in general fetish worship. These entities cannot possess the human ego, nor could they use it if it could come into their possession. A human body is sometimes convenient for them, and for the sake of being permitted to obsess it they will sometimes enter into an arrangement. The making of a compact of this nature gives the entity a strong hold upon the man. But as soon as he discovers the folly of his action, the proper course for the man to take is to resist such obsession to the utmost. Childish ceremonies, such as signing with his own blood, would of course make no difference whatever. There is no hierarchy of evil. There are black magicians certainly, but the black magician is usually merely a single solitary entity. He is working for himself, as a separate entity, and for his own ends. You cannot have a hierarchy of people who distrust one another. In the White Brotherhood every member trusts the others, but you cannot have trust with the dark people, because their interests are built upon self. You must, however, take care what you mean when you speak of evil. The principle of destruction is often personified, but it is only that old forms are broken down to be used as material for building new and higher ones. Here in India there is Shiva, the destroyer, but no one would think of him as evil. He is one of the highest manifestations of the deity. The principle of the destruction of forms is necessary in order that life may progress. There is a great one, a part of whose function it is to arrange when the great cataclysms shall take place, but he works for the good of the world. These things are not to be thought of as in any way evil. The notion of a supposed angel who revolted and was turned out of heaven is very much based upon John Milton. The conception is not at all the same in the book of Job. In that story the devil is quite a different person from the gloomy hero in the Miltonic conception. Then the Buddhists have Mara, a personification of the karma of the past descending upon the man at once and taking many forms. There is an instant working out of karma upon the attainment of enlightenment. The statement that all material things, all differences and limitations are evil is misleading. If by evil you mean what is ordinarily connoted by that word, and not some other and quite different notion of an abstract kind, then matter is not evil. Spirit and matter are equal. Matter is not in opposition to spirit. We find matter troublesome because of the bodies we have to use, but we are here in order to learn what without the physical life could not be conveyed to us. The physical plane experiences give a definiteness and precision to our consciousness and powers which we could never acquire on any plane unless we had spent the necessary time on this. But why do people bother about evil? There is plenty of good in the world, and it is better to think of that, for your thought strengthens that of which you think. To think and talk so much about black magicians unquestionably attracts their attention to you, and the results are often exceedingly undesirable. Hinduism. When ignorant missionaries dilate upon the 330 million gods of the Hindus, they are making a very gross misrepresentation of a religion which is far more scientific than their own. Hinduism, like every other religion, knows perfectly well that there can be only one God, though there may be countless manifestations of him. To call these gods is of course ridiculous. It is perhaps better to avoid the word God altogether, because of the exceedingly unpleasant ideas which have been associated with it by the Christians. But if it is to be used, at least it should never be applied to any being lower than the logos of the solar system. All the good things attributed to the Christian God are true of the logos. There is nothing in the system that is not he, and yet he is much more than his system. We could not possibly grasp the truth about the Absolute. Anything which we are able to grasp must after all be small, since our minds are so small. The advice of the Lord Buddha to his people was always that they should not trouble themselves about such remote matters, since it was impossible to arrive at any conclusion, and nothing useful came from it. The images of the Indian deities are usually highly magnetized, and when they are carried round the streets at the festivals their influence upon the people is unquestionably productive of much good. In many of the Hindu temples there are strong permanent influences at work, as is the case for example at Madura. Once when I visited that city some white ashes from the temple of Shiva were given to me, and also a bright crimson powder from the temple of Parvati. And I found that both of these were so powerfully magnetized as to retain their influence for some years and after much traveling. India is essentially a country of rites and ceremonies. The religion is full of them, and a great many of them are said to have been prescribed by the Manu himself, though it is quite obvious that many others have been added at a much later date. Some of them appear to be regulations such as would be quite necessary at the beginning of a new race, but now that it is thoroughly established it seems clear that they are useless. In many cases when one watches their performance one can see quite clearly what must originally have been intended, even though now the ceremony has become a mere empty shell, and no result follows upon it. Such things are not without their value for younger souls, indeed there are many who delight in them and obtain great benefit from them. But of course none of them can ever be really necessary, and all such bondage falls away altogether from the really developed man. Originally every householder was the priest of his own family, but as the civilization became more complex the rites and ceremonies grew more complex also, and therefore a class of specially instructed priests had to spring up. Because no one who had anything else to do could possibly remember the wealth of unnecessary detail. In these days it would seem that most people perform them, or have them performed for them, much in the same spirit as they take medicine from a doctor, without understanding what it is, but with the faith that it will somehow do them good. There are, however, many people who cannot put heart and soul into a ceremony unless they do understand it, and these people usually end by breaking away from ceremonies altogether. It is sad to see priests performing the old ceremonies and using the old forms which once were so effective, and yet producing no result worth mentioning. There seems to be no will in these days. They commence some of their recitations, Om, Bur, Buvar, swore, but nothing whatever happens when they recite the words. In the old days the officiant who said this threw some will into it, and raised his own consciousness, as well as that of those present who were responsive, from one plane to the other as he spoke. I remember seeing this strongly exemplified in the performance of a striking ceremony, when we were examining one of the earlier lives which occurred many thousands of years ago here in India. The people all entered an inner room and stood in absolute darkness. In the beginning of the ceremony the officiant slowly and solemnly uttered those words, and each produced its due effect upon the majority of those who stood around him. The word Om brought all the people in close harmony with him, and with the feelings which filled his mind. Then, at the utterance of the word Bur, to their senses the room was filled with ordinary light, and they were able to see all the physical objects in it. When, after an interval, the second word came, astral sight was temporarily opened for them. And the third word produced the same effect upon their mental sight, and brought round them all the bliss and power of the higher plane, and that condition persisted during the recitation of the various verses which followed. Of course these effects were only temporary, and when the ceremony was over the higher consciousness faded away from those who had taken part in it, but nevertheless it remained for them a tremendous experience. And the effect of it was that on another similar occasion this higher consciousness was more readily and more fully aroused in them. But now nothing of this sort seems to be done anywhere. Now the priest arranges his fuel and utters a solemn invocation to Agni, and then lights the fire with a match. In the old days that which is represented by Agni really did come, and the fire fell from heaven, to use an old expression. But all outer husks seem to remain. There is a quite rational and scientific idea underlying the practice of pilgrimage. Great shrines are usually erected on the spot where some holy man has lived or where some great event has happened, such as an initiation, or else in connection with some relic of a great person. In any one of these cases a powerful magnetic center of influence has been created, which will persist for thousands of years. Any sensitive person who approaches the spot will feel this influence, and its effect upon him is unquestionably good. Where there is a strong vibration at a much higher level than any attained by ordinary humanity, its action upon any man who comes within its influence is to raise his own vibrations for the time towards unison with it. The pilgrim who comes to such a spot and bathes himself in its magnetism, perhaps for several days together, is certainly the better for it, although different people will be affected in different degrees, according to their power of receptivity. Such a place of pilgrimage is the Bodhi tree at Buddha Gaya, the spot where the Lord Gautama attained his Buddhahood. This is true although the tree which is there now is not the original one. That fell some time in the Middle Ages, and the present tree is only an offshoot from it. But nevertheless the tremendously strong magnetism of the spot remains and is likely to do so for many a century yet to come. Castes. It is said that originally each caste had its distinctive color. Indeed, the actual meaning of varna, the Sanskrit word for caste, is color. I have not studied the question, but at least it is clear that the colors which are usually given do not indicate in any way the auras of the people. Only a young child has a white aura, and even the adepts have various colors in their tremendous glow, yet for some reason the Brahmin is traditionally mentioned as white. A Kshatriya is said to have some connection with the color red. There are several reds in the human aura, from the rose of affection to the scarlet of anger and indignation, and the brown reds of sensuality. But the Kshatriya has no more of these than other men. Yellow is traditionally ascribed to the Vaishya. But yellow in the aura signifies intellect, and we have no reason to consider the Vaishya especially endowed with this quality. A Shudra is spoken of as black. If we adopt the suggestion that these colors had to do with the ancient and primitive races, we shall find the facts more tractable. The Aryans, representing the Brahmin caste, were undoubtedly much lighter in color than the people amongst whom they came. The reddish Toltec people who were ruling large portions of the land when the Aryan invasion took place may have some connection with the original Kshatriya caste. The Aboriginals, who were Lemurians, and are now only represented by some of the hill tribes, were almost black in color. They may be connected with the Shudras. Between them and the Toltecs there appear to have been several waves of different Atlantean subraces who settled down as traders, and these men were of a yellowish color, as is the present-day Chinaman. Perhaps they were the original Vaishyas. No doubt as we carry further and further back the investigations which we are making in connection with the lines of past lives which are now being examined, we shall obtain more definite information on the subject of the origin of these castes, and of this question of their relation to color. Spiritualism. Never forget that the spiritualists are entirely with us on some most important points. They all hold life after death as an actual vivid ever-present certainty, and b. eternal progress and ultimate happiness for everyone. Good and bad alike. Now these two items are of such tremendous, such paramount importance, they constitute so enormous an advance from the ordinary orthodox position, that I for one should be well content to join hands with them on such a platform. And postpone the discussion of the minor points upon which we differ until we have converted the world at large to that much of the truth. I always feel that there is plenty of room for both of us. People who want to see phenomena, people who cannot believe anything without ocular demonstration, will obtain no satisfaction with us, while from the spiritualists they will get exactly what they want. On the other hand, people who want more philosophy than spiritualism usually provides will naturally gravitate in our direction. Those who admire the average transaddress certainly would not appreciate theosophy, while those who enjoy theosophical teaching would never be satisfied with the transaddress. We both cater for the liberal, the open-minded, but for quite different types of them. Meantime, we surely need not quarrel. In what Madame Blavatsky wrote on the subject, she laid great stress on the utter uncertainty of the whole thing, and the preponderance of personations over real appearances. My own personal experience has been more favorable than that. I spent some years in experimenting with spiritualism, and I suppose there is hardly a phenomenon of which you may read in the books which I have not repeatedly seen. I have encountered many personations, but still in my experience a distinct majority of the apparitions have been genuine, and therefore I am bound to bear testimony to the fact. The messages which they give are often uninteresting, and their religious teaching is usually Christianity and water, but still it is liberal as far as it goes, and anything is an advance upon the bigoted orthodox position. Not that some spiritualists are not bigoted also, narrow and intolerant as any sectarian, when it comes to discussing, say, the question of reincarnation. The majority of English and American spiritualists do not yet know of that fact, but the French spiritists, the followers of Allan Kardec, hold it, and also the school of Madame d'Esperance in England. Many students wonder that dead people should not all know and recognize the fact of reincarnation, but after all, why should they? When a man dies, he resorts to the company of those whom he has known on earth. He moves among exactly the same kind of people as during physical life. The average country grocer is no more likely after death than before it to come into contact with anyone who can give him information about reincarnation. Most men are shut in from all new ideas by a host of prejudices. They carry these prejudices into the astral world with them, and are no more amenable to reason and common sense there than here. True, a man who is really open-minded can learn a great deal on the astral plane. He may speedily acquaint himself with the whole of the theosophical teaching, and there are dead men who do this. Therefore it often happens that scraps of theosophy are found among spirit communications. We must not forget that there is a higher spiritualism of which the public knows nothing, which never publishes any account of its results. The best circles of all are strictly private, restricted entirely to one family, or to a small number of friends. In such circles the same people meet over and over again, and no outsider is ever admitted to make any change in the magnetism. So the conditions set up are singularly perfect, and the results obtained are of the most surprising character. At public séances, to which any one may be admitted on payment, an altogether lower class of dead people appear, because of the promiscuous jumble of inharmonious magnetisms. Symbology. Symbology is a very interesting study. To a certain type of mind everything expresses itself in symbols, and to some people they are of the greatest possible help. I myself do not happen to be of that type, and therefore I have not paid special attention to them or made any particular study of them. Some of them however are obvious, and readily comprehensible to anyone who understands even a little of the principles of their interpretation. Think, for example, of those which appear on the earlier pages of the Book of Zion. On the first page is a white disk, signifying the first condition of the unmanifested. On the second page a spot appears in the center of the white disk, signifying the first manifestation, the first logos, or the Christ in the bosom of the Father. On the third page this spot has expanded into a bar, dividing the disk into two halves and so signifying the first great separation into spirit and matter, also the second logos, always spoken of as dual or androgynous. On the fourth page another bar has appeared at right angles to the first, giving us the forms of a circle divided into 4 equal parts or quarters, signifying the emergence of the third logos, though he is still in a condition of inactivity. On the next page the outer circle falls away, leaving us the equal-armed or Greek cross. This denotes the third logos ready for action, just about to descend into the matter of his cosmos. The next stage of this activity is shown by various forms of the symbol. Sometimes the arms of the Greek cross widen out as they recede from the center, and then we get the form called the Maltese cross. Another line of symbology retains the straight arms of the Greek cross, but draws a flame shooting out from the end of each arm, to signify the burning light within. A further extension of this idea sets the cross whirling round its center, like a revolving wheel, and when that is done the flames are drawn as streaming backwards as the cross revolves. And in that way we get one of the most universal of all symbols, that of the swastika, which is to be found in every country in the world, and in connection with every religion. The symbolic meaning of the ordinary Latin cross, as it is used in the Christian Church, has no connection whatever with this line of thought. Its meaning is entirely different, for it symbolizes the second logos, and his descent into matter, and it is also closely connected with the initiation rites of ancient Egypt. In the case of the Book of Zion, the comprehension of the symbol is enormously assisted by the fact that the book itself is highly magnetized in a peculiar way. So that when the student who is privileged to see it takes one of the pages in his hand, a remarkable effect is produced upon him. Before his mind's eye arises the picture of that which the page is intended to symbolize, and simultaneously he hears a sort of recitation of the stanza which describes it. It is very difficult to put this clearly into words, but the experience is a wonderful one. I have myself seen and handled the copy which Madame Blavatsky describes, from the study of which she wrote The Secret Doctrine. That is of course not the original book, but the copy of it which is kept in the Occult Museum, which is under the care of the Master K.H. The original document is at Shambhala, in the care of the head of the hierarchy, and is certainly the oldest book in the world. Indeed, it has been said that part of it, the first 6 stanzas, I think, is even older than the world, for it is said to have been brought over from some previous chain. That most ancient part is regarded by some as not merely an account of the processes of the coming into existence of a system, but rather a kind of manual of directions for such an act of creation. Even the copy must be millions of years old. Another well-known symbol is that of the great bird, which is used to denote the deity in the act of hovering over his universe, brooding over the waters of space, or darting onward along the line of his evolution. To repose between the wings of the great bird means so to meditate as to realize union with the Logos, and it is said that the man who reaches that level may rest there for untold years. The word Om is another presentation of the same idea. It is the sacred word of the 5th or Aryan root race. The Atlantean sacred word was Tau, and it has been said that the sacred words given to the root races in succession are all of them consecutive syllables of one great word, which is the true sacred name. Another obvious symbol, the heart, was prominent in the old Atlantean religion. In the innermost shrine of the great temple in the city of the Golden Gate there lay upon the altar a massive golden box in the shape of a heart, the secret opening of which was known only to the high priest. This was called the heart of the world, and signified to them the innermost mysteries that they knew. In it they kept their most sacred things, and much of their symbolism centered around it. They knew that every atom beats as a heart, and they considered that the sun had a similar movement, which they connected with the sunspot period. Sometimes one comes across passages in their books which give the impression that they knew more than we do in matters of science, though they regarded it all rather from the poetic than from the scientific point of view. They thought, for example, that the earth breathes and moves. And it is certainly true that quite recently scientific men have discovered that there is a regular daily displacement of the earth's surface which may be thought of as corresponding in a certain way to breathing. Another symbol is that of the lotus, and it is used to signify the solar system in its relation to its logos. There is a real reason for this comparison in the actual facts of nature. The 7 planetary logoi, although they are great individual entities, are at the same time aspects of the solar logos, 4 centers as it were in his body. Now each of these great living centers or subsidiary logoi has a sort of orderly periodic change or motion of his own, corresponding perhaps on some infinitely higher level to the regular beating of the human heart, or to the inspiration and expiration of the breath. Some of these periodic changes are more rapid than others, so that a very complicated series of effects is produced. And it has been observed that the movements of the physical planets in their relation to one another furnish a clue to the operation of these great cosmic influences at any given moment. Each of these centers has his special location or major focus within the body of the Sun, and has also a minor focus which is always exterior to the Sun. The position of this minor focus is always indicated by a physical planet. The exact relation can hardly be made clear to our three-dimensional phraseology, but we may perhaps put it that each center has a field of influence practically coextensive with the solar system. That if a section of the field could be taken it would be found to be elliptical, and that one of the foci of each ellipse would always be in the Sun, and the other would be the special planet ruled by the subsidiary logos. It is probable that, in the gradual condensation of the original glowing nebula from which the system was formed, the location of the planets was determined by the formation of vortices at these minor foci. They being auxiliary points of distribution, ganglia as it were in the solar system. All the physical planets are included within the portion of the system which is common to all the ovoids. So that anyone who tries mentally to construct the figure will see that these revolving ovoids must have their projecting segments. And he will therefore be prepared to understand the comparison of the system as a whole to a flower with many petals. Another reason for this comparison of the system to a lotus is even more beautiful, but requires deeper thought. As we see them the planets appear as separate globes. But there is in reality a connection between them which is out of reach of our brain consciousness. Those who have studied the subject of the fourth dimension are familiar with the idea of an extension in a direction invisible to us, but it may not have occurred to them that it is applicable to the solar system as a whole. We may obtain a suggestion of the facts by holding the hand palm upwards bent so as to form a kind of cup, but with the fingers separated, and then laying a sheet of paper upon the tips of the fingers. A two-dimensional being living on the plane of that sheet of paper could not possibly be conscious of the hand as a whole, but could perceive only the tiny circles at the points of contact between the fingers and the paper. To him these circles would be entirely unconnected, but we, using the sight of a higher dimension, can see that each of them has a downward expansion, and that in that way they are all parts of a hand. In exactly the same way the man using the sight of the fourth dimension may observe that the planets which are isolated in our three dimensions are all the time joined in another way which we cannot yet see. And from the point of view of that higher sight these globes are but the points of petals which are part of one great flower. And the glowing heart of that flower throws up a central pistil which appears to us as the sun. It is not wise for the votary of modern science to ridicule or despise either the learning of old time or the strange and fanciful symbols in which it was expressed. For many of these ancient symbols are pregnant with meaning, often with meaning showing deeper knowledge than the outer world now possesses. The theosophical student at least will avoid the mistake of despising anything merely because he does not yet comprehend it, because he has not yet learnt the language in which it is written. Fire. On higher planes everything is what down here we should call luminous, and above a certain level everything may be said to be permeated by fire, yet not at all such fire as we know on the physical plane. What we call by that name down here cannot exist without something which either burns or glows, and it is only a kind of reflection or lower expression of a higher abstract thing which we cannot sense. Try to think of a fire which does not burn, but is in a liquid form, something like water. This was known to the followers of the first great Zoroaster, for they had this fire which no fuel on their altars, a sacred fire by means of which they symbolized divine life. One way of reaching the Logos is along the line of fire, and the ancient Parsis knew this well, and raised themselves until they were one with the fire, so as to reach him by way of it. The only way in which it can be done is through the assistance of certain classes of devas, but at this period of the world's history we are so grossly material that very few can stand the ordeal. The first Zoroaster had around him many who were able to take that way. And, though under present conditions our lower vehicles would probably be destroyed if we should make such an attempt, in new races and on other planets we shall be able to take that way again. All this sounds strange and weird and incomprehensible, because it deals with conditions which are utterly unknown on the physical plane. But the student of occultism will find that in the course of his progress he has to face many things which cannot at all be expressed in words down here. Third section, the Theosophical Attitude. Common sense. Above all things and under all circumstances the student of occultism must hold fast to common sense. He will meet with many new ideas, with many startling facts, and if he allows the strangeness of things to overbalance him, harm instead of good will result from the increase of his knowledge. Many other qualities are desirable for progress, but a well-balanced mind is an actual necessity. The study of occultism may indeed be summed up in this: it is the study of much that is unrecognized ordinary man, the acquisition therefore of a great multitude of new facts. And then the adaptation of one's life to the new facts in a reasonable and common-sense way. All occultism of which I know anything is simply an apotheosis of common sense. Brotherhood. The brotherhood of man is a fact in nature. Those who deny it are simply those who are blind to it, because they shut their eyes to actualities which they do not wish to acknowledge. We need waste little time over those who deny it. Nature itself will refute their heresy. More subtly dangerous are those who misunderstand it, and their name is legion. Remember not only what brotherhood means, but also what it does not mean. It emphatically does not mean equality, for twins and triplets are comparatively rare. Under all but the most abnormal circumstances, brotherhood implies a difference in age, and consequently all sorts of other differences, in strength, in cleverness, in capacity. Brotherhood implies community of interest, but not community of interests. If the family be rich all its members profit thereby, if the family be poor, all its members suffer accordingly. So there is a community of interest. But the individual interests of the brothers not only may be, but also for many years must be, absolutely different. What interests has the boy of 14 in common with his brother of 6? Each lives his own life among friends of his own age, and has far more in common with them than with his brother. What cares the elder brother of 25, fighting his way in the world, for all the prizes and anxieties of school life which fill the horizon of that second brother? It is not to be expected, then, that because they are brothers men shall feel alike or be interested in the same things. It would not be desirable, even if it were possible, for their duties differ according to their ages. And the one thing which most promotes the evolution of the human family as a whole is that every man should strive earnestly to do his duty in that state of life to which it shall please God to call him, as the Church Catechism puts it. This does not in the least imply that every man must always remain in the station in which his karma has placed him at birth. If he can honestly and harmlessly make such further karma as will raise him out of it, he is at perfect liberty to do so. But at whatever stage he may be, he should do the duties of that stage. The child grows steadily, but while he is at a certain age, his duties are those appropriate to that age, and not those of some older brother. Each age has its duties, the younger to learn and to serve, and the older to direct and protect, but all alike to be loving and helpful, all alike to try to realize the idea of the great family of humanity. Each will best help his brothers, not by interfering with them, but by trying earnestly to do his own duty as a member of this family. The brotherhood of our society ought to be a very real thing. It is important that we should recognize and realize a close fellowship, a feeling of real unity in drawing together. This will be achieved if members will forget their own personal feelings and think chiefly of the interests of others. The heart of the society is making for itself a body on the Buddhic plane, a channel through which the great ones can work. The perfection of the channel as such depends upon the attitude of the earnest and devoted members. As yet it is very imperfect, because of the tendency of each member to think too much of himself as a unit, and too little of the good and well-being of the whole. The stones of the wall must be built each in its own place. One standing out of place here, or projecting there, causes roughness, and the wall as a whole is a less perfect wall. We form but a little part of a vast scheme, one wheel as it were of a machine. It is for us to make ourselves really fit for our little part. If we do that, though we may be quite unfit to take a leading position in the drama of the world, yet what little we do is well done and lasting, and will honorably fill its place in the greater whole. You are all aware that in 700 years' time our two masters will commence the founding of the sixth root race, and that even already they are looking about for those who will be suitable assistants for them in that work. But there is something nearer than that to be done, and it is a work which will afford excellent practice in developing the qualities necessary for that larger work. And this is the development of the sixth sub-race of the Aryan race, which is now just beginning to be formed in North America. Already signs are to be seen of the preparations for this work, different races are being welded together in one. And we too have our part to play in this. We all recognize how important it is that a child's early years should be surrounded by good influences, and it is just the same with the childhood of a race. If we can succeed in starting this young race along right lines, much will be gained, and we, even at this distance from America, can be of great help at this critical period of history, if we will. Part of the scheme very shortly to be realized is the drawing together of the various branches of our fifth subrace, the Teutonic. Many of us belong to that, the English colonies, the Americans, the Scandinavians, the Dutch and the Germans. And many also in France and Italy, as for example the Normans, who are the descendants of the Norsemen, and also those in southern countries who are descendants of the Goths and Visigoths. What is desired in order to promote the work of the great plan is that all these races should be drawn into much closer sympathy. This has already been achieved to a great extent in the case of England and America. It is very much to be regretted that it cannot be done in the case of Germany also, but for the present that great country seems disposed to hold aloof from the desired coalition, and to stand out for what it considers its own private interests. It is much to be hoped that this difficulty may be overcome. The great purpose of this drawing together is to prepare the way for the coming of the new Messiah, or, as we should say in theosophical circles, the next advent of the Lord Maitreya, as a great spiritual teacher, bringing a new religion. The time is rapidly approaching when this shall be launched, a teaching which shall unify the other religions, and compared with them shall stand upon a broader basis and keep its purity longer. But before this can come about we must have got rid of the incubus of war, which at present is always hanging over our heads like a great spectre, paralyzing the best intellects of all countries as regards social experiments, making it impossible for our statesmen to try new plans and methods on a large scale. Therefore one essential towards carrying out the scheme is a period of universal peace. Many efforts have already been made in various ways to bring about this result, for example the peace conference. But it seems that some other way will have to be tried. If we of the fifth subrace can but put aside our prejudices and stand side by side, a great work lies before us in the future. Ours is the latest subrace, and therefore contains, generally speaking, the highest egos in evolution. Yet the majority of the people in it are by no means ready to respond to a purely unselfish motive as a means of bringing about the universal peace required. How then can this best be attained? By making it to the interest of all these nations to insist upon universal peace. Remember that trade suffers during war. We of these various branches of the Teutonic race are the greatest trading nations of the world, and I hope that we may shortly realize that it is to our interest to bind ourselves together, and to stand for peace. Truly this is not a very high motive, for it is merely self-interest. But still when the rulers and great statesmen are moved to desire unity from the abstract love for humanity, this lower motive may help to bring their less developed fellow countrymen into line with them, and cause them warmly to support any movement which they may set on foot for that object. All sorts of events are being utilized to help this binding together of our race. For example, the death of Her Majesty the late Queen Victoria was very decidedly utilized for that purpose. Her life did very much in drawing the colonies together into closer bonds with the mother country. Those who saw the Jubilee procession from the psychic standpoint were greatly impressed with the mighty current of high emotion thereby evoked. In her life she did much, but at her death still more was accomplished. By her death she drew close not only our colonies, but also the United States. I was in America at the time of her death, and really it might have been their own ruler for whom the Americans were mourning, so spontaneous and so sincere were their expressions of the sense of loss. So in her death the great Queen did grand service, as well as in her life. Each race has its own peculiarities, just as each individual has. If we wish to cooperate in the great work, we must learn to allow for these, to be tolerant of them, and to regard them with a kindly interest, instead of sneering at them or letting them get on our nerves. What then can we do practically to help these great national affairs? This at least, that when in our presence unkind or sneering remarks are made about other nations, we can make a point of always putting forward considerations on the other side, and saying something kindly. We may not always be able to contradict the evil thing said, but at least we may supplement it with something that is good. There are perhaps but few of us, but at least in the course of a year each of us probably meets at least 1,000 others, and each of us may to that extent be a center for helping our own nation to see good in others, and thus, though it may be only in a small way, we may be able to smooth the path and make the way for union easier. Many people are constantly in the habit of speaking with narrow prejudice against the peculiarities of other nations. Let us at least take care not to do this, but always bear in mind the importance of promoting friendly feeling. Do not let us despair when we think how little each one of us can do in the matter. Let us rather remember that every little effort will be used by those who are working from behind. No doubt the scheme will be carried out whether or not we take the privilege which is offered to us of helping in it, but that is no reason why we should not do our best. Nor is it only good people who are used in the promotion of the scheme. All sorts of forces are being used by the great brotherhood that stands behind to forward necessary work. Yes, even the very selfishness and the failings of men. Blindly the wicked work the righteous will of heaven, as Southey writes in Thalaba. And, all things work together for good to them that love God. This was spoken as regards personal karma, but the same thing holds good in regard to greater and broader schemes. For example, the bigotry of the Christian Church, evil though it is, has not been altogether valueless, for it has helped to develop strength of faith, since the ignorant cannot believe strongly without being bigoted. Self-seeking in commercial pursuits is evil also, yet it has in it a certain power which can be turned to account by those who stand behind, for it develops strength of will and concentration. Qualities which in a future life may be put to most valuable uses. We each have an opportunity to help in this scheme, to cooperate on the side of good. If we do not take the opportunity offered to us, another will, and if not that other, then another, but in any case the work will be done. We know that already some to whom the opportunity has been offered have cast it aside, but that is only all the more reason why we show one work with greater vigor, so as to atone for their defection, to do their share as well as our own. Never for a moment must we fear that because of such defection the work will be allowed to suffer. We cannot but regret that our poor friends should lose their opportunities, that from ignorance and lack of clear-sightedness they are working so sadly against their own interests. Yet remember that their folly is but temporary. They will awaken to the truth some day, if not in this life, then in some other. Meantime inside all is well, and the great work is going forward. The evolution of the world is, after all, like any other large undertaking. Think of the making of a railway, for instance. It does not matter to the railway company or to the future passengers which workman lays a certain rail or drives a certain bolt, so long as it is well and truly done. And the overseer will attend to that. It matters very much to the workman, for he who works receives the pay, while the other gets nothing. The overseer regrets it when a workman goes off in a fit of temper or of drunkenness and refuses to work for a day, but he thinks, never mind, he will come back tomorrow, and meantime he employs someone else. Many have left the work in just that way in an outburst of personality, but they will return. The question is not as to whether the work shall be done, the masters will see to that in any case. It is only as to who will embrace the opportunity of doing it. Many people who contend bitterly against the right are merely showing that they are not yet fit to pass this test. They have not yet reached the stage where they can forget themselves utterly in the work, their personalities are still rampant, and so they are capable of being shocked and thrown off their balance, if some new fact comes before them. It is sad, of course, but it is only temporary. They have lost a good opportunity for this life, because they are not yet strong enough for it, but there are many lives yet to come. Meantime others will take their places. Never forget that one thing of importance is that the Master's work should be done. Let us at least be among those who are doing it now, even though there are many who cannot yet see clearly enough to help us. They repudiate the masters for this life, like a naughty little boy who gets angry with his parents, and in a fit of passion runs away and hides himself. But presently hunger brings the naughty little boy home again, and in the same way hunger for the truth which they have once tasted will bring most of them back to the feet of the masters in their next lives. Meantime let us stand firm, and fill our hearts with peace even in the midst of strife. If we would rise to our opportunity we must rub down our corners and get rid of our awkward personalities, and forget them in encouraging good feeling in every possible way. If we hear something said against somebody else let us at once try to put the other side, and this both with regard to nations and individuals. Counterbalance the evil by speaking the good, not to give a false impression, but to give the best possible aspect or interpretation of the facts. Our work is to make the machine run smoothly, and neutralize the friction. Our aim is to be a united whole as a society, and to help towards harmony in the outside world. The scheme is great, the opportunity glorious, shall we take it? Yet beware lest you should make the idea of preparing yourself for grand work in the future an excuse for neglecting the minor opportunities of everyday life. A good example of what I mean is offered by a letter which I recently received, in which the writer says that he finds himself in the position of having to teach a theosophical branch, and that he feels it a great responsibility, of which he cannot think himself worthy because his knowledge is at present so imperfect. Now in reply to this I shall say, do not be in the least troubled about your position towards your branch. Assuredly it is a responsibility to teach, but on the other hand it is a very great privilege. Think of it rather in this way, that here are a number of hungry souls, and those who stand behind have been so kind to you as to give you the opportunity of being the channel through which these can be fed. You have the broad principles of the teaching clearly in mind, and your own common sense will keep you from going far wrong in details. I admire your extreme consciousness, but if you keep these main principles steadily before your pupils, you are very little likely to go wrong in your teaching. We all have the responsibility of which you speak, and those of us who have to write the books and give the lectures feel it far more acutely than you can imagine. Indeed we have sometimes been told by friends that we ought to have attained adeptship before we wrote any books, so that it might be quite certain that there should be no mistakes in them. I can only say that we decided to share our imperfect knowledge with our brothers, even while we still have very much to acquire, and I think that the result has justified our decision. If we had waited until we attained adeptship, it is true that our books would have been perfect, and they are very far from being perfect now, but then you see you would all have had to wait 1,000 years or so for them, which would have made a considerable difference to the work of the society in the present century. It seems to me that the problem that lies before you is an exactly similar one. You also might refrain from teaching until you knew everything, but what would become of your branch in the meantime? Helping the world. One of the first qualifications which are required for the treading of the path is single-mindedness or one-pointedness. Even worldly men succeed because they are one-pointed, and we can learn from them the value of determination on our own line. Our goal is not so tangible as theirs, so we have more difficulty in keeping the one-pointed attitude of mind. But in India the importance of the unseen is more easily realized than in the West. It is good to seek the company of those who are more advanced, to whom the realities of the path are constantly present. Also to read and hear and think about our purpose frequently, and unwaveringly to practice the virtues by which alone the perfect knowledge can come to us. This an age of hurry and scurry. The tendency is for people to do a little of many things, but nothing thoroughly, to flutter from one thing to another. No man now devotes his life to a masterpiece, as was often done in the Middle Ages in Europe, in old days in India. Occultism changes a man's life in many ways, but in none more than in this, it makes him absolutely one-pointed. Of course I do not mean that it causes him to neglect any duty that he used to do. On the contrary, the never-ceasing watch to fulfill every duty is its first prescription. But it gives him a keynote of life which is always sounding in his ears, which he never forgets for an instant, the keynote of helpfulness. Why? Because he learns what is the plan of the logos, and tries to cooperate in it. This involves many lines of action. To be able to help effectively, he must make himself fit to help. Hence he must undertake the most careful self-training, the elimination of evil qualities from himself, the development merit of good ones. Also he must maintain a constant watchfulness for opportunities to help. One special method of helping the world lies ready to the hand of members of our society, that of spreading theosophic truth. We have no right and no desire to force our ideas on anyone, but it is our duty and our privilege to give people the opportunity of knowing the real explanation of the problems of life. If when the water of life is offered, a man will not drink, that is his own affair, but at least we should see that none perishes through ignorance of the existence of that water. We have then this duty of spreading the truth, and nothing should be allowed to interfere with it. This is the work that as a society we have to do, and we must remember that the duty is binding upon each of us. Our minds must be filled with it, we must be constantly thinking and planning for it, seizing every opportunity that offers. It is not for us to excuse ourselves because some other member seems to be doing nothing. That is his business, and we are in no way concerned in it, but if we ourselves neglect to do our very best, we are failing in our duty. It was not to illumine our own path that this glorious light came to us, but that we also in our turn might be light-bearers to our suffering brothers. Criticism. If we wish to make any progress in occultism, we must learn to mind our own business and let other people alone. They have their reasons and their lines of thought which we do not understand. To their own master they stand or fall. Once more, we have our work to do, and we decline to be diverted from it. We must learn charity and tolerance, and repress the mad desire to be always finding fault with someone else. It is a mad desire, and it dominates modern life, this spirit of criticism. Everyone wants to interfere with somebody else's duty, instead of attending to his own. Everyone thinks he can do the other man's work better than it is being done. We see it in politics, in religion, in social life. For example, the obvious duty of a government is to govern, and the duty of its people is to be good citizens and to make that work of government easy and effective. But in these days people are so eager to teach their governments how to govern that they forget all about their own primary duty of being good citizens. Men will not realize that if they will but do their duties, karma will look after the rights about which they are so clamorous. How comes this spirit of criticism to be so general and so savage at this stage of the world's history? Like most other evils, it is the excess of a good and necessary quality. In the course of evolution we have arrived at the fifth subrace of the fifth root race. I mean that race is the latest yet developed, that its spirit is dominant in the world just now, and that even those who do not belong to it are necessarily much influenced by that spirit. Now each race has its own special lessons to learn, its own special quality to unfold. The quality of the fifth race is what is sometimes called manas, the type of intellect that discriminates, that notes the differences between things. When it is perfectly developed, men will note these differences calmly, solely for the purpose of understanding them and judging which is best. But now, in this stage of half-development most people look for differences from their own point of view not in order to understand them but in order to oppose them, often violently to persecute them. It is simply the point of view of the ignorant and unevolved man, who is full of intolerance and self-conceit. Absolutely sure that he is right, perhaps he may be up to a certain point, and that everybody else therefore must be entirely wrong, which does not follow. Remember that Oliver Cromwell said to his council, "Brethren, I beseech you in the sacred name of the Christ to think it possible that you may sometimes mistake." We too must develop the critical faculty. But we should criticize ourselves, not others. There are always two sides to every question, generally more than two. Criterion means to judge, therefore criticism is useless and can only do harm unless it is absolutely calm and judicial. It is not a mad attack upon the opponent, but a quiet unprejudiced weighing of reasons for and against a certain opinion or a certain course of action. We may decide in one way, but we must recognize that another man of equal intellect may emphasize another aspect of the question, and therefore, decide quite otherwise. And yet in so deciding he may be just as good, just as wise, just as honest as we ourselves. Yet how few recognize that, how few rabid Protestants really believe Catholics to be good men. How few convinced red-hot radicals really believe that an old Tory squire may be just as good and earnest a man as themselves, trying honestly to do what he thinks his duty. If a man comes to a decision different from our own, we need not pretend to agree with him, but we must give him credit for good intentions. One of the worst features of modern life is its eager readiness to believe evil, its habit of deliberately seeking out the worst conceivable construction that can be put upon everything. And this attitude is surely at its very worst when adopted towards those who have helped us, to whom we owe thanks for knowledge or inspiration received. Remember the words of the Master, ingratitude is not one of our vices. It is always a mistake to rush madly into criticism of those who know more than we. It is more seemly to wait and think matters over, to wait and see what the future brings forth. Apply the test of time and the result. By their fruits ye shall know them. Let us make a rule to think the best of every man, let us do our work and leave others free to do theirs. Prejudice. Beware of the beginnings of suspicion, it will distort everything. I have seen it come between friends and noticed how a little suspicion soon grows into a giant misunderstanding. Every harmless word is distorted, and mistaken to be the expression of some unkind or improper motive, while all the time the speaker is utterly unconscious of the suspicion. It is the same when opinions differ about books or religion. A slight difference of opinion is fostered by dwelling upon all that tells on one's own side and against the other side, until the result is an absurdly distorted view. One finds it again with color prejudice, although those now wearing white bodies have worn brown ones and vice versa, and the habits of one have been or will be the habits of the other. Brotherhood means the getting rid of prejudices. Knowledge of the fact of reincarnation ought to help us to overcome our limitations and uncharitableness. We who are students of the higher life must rise above these prejudices. It is a difficult task, because they are ingrained, prejudices of race, of caste, of religion, but they must all be rooted out, because they prevent clear sight and true judgment. They are like colored glass, still more like cheap, imperfect glass, everything seen through them is distorted, often so much so as to look entirely different from what it really is. Before we can judge and discriminate we must see clearly. It is always very easy to attribute some evil motive to others whom we have allowed ourselves to dislike, and to discover some evil explanation for their acts. This tendency forms a very serious impediment in the path of progress. We must tear away our own personalities, for only then shall we be at all able to see the other person as he is. A prejudice is a kind of wart upon the mental body, and of course when a man tries to look out through that particular part of the body he cannot see clearly. It is in reality a congested spot in the mental body, a point at which the matter is no longer living and flowing, but is stagnant and rotten. The way to cure it is to acquire more knowledge, to get the matter of the mental body into motion, and then one by one the prejudices will be washed away and dissolved. This evil effect of prejudice was what Aryasanga meant when he said, in the voice of the silence, that the mind was the great slayer of the real. By that he was drawing attention to the fact that we do not see any object as it is. We see only the images that we are able to make of it, and everything is necessarily colored for us by these thought forms of our own creation. Notice how two persons with preconceived ideas, seeing the same set of circumstances, and agreeing as to the actual happenings, will yet make two totally different stories from them. Exactly this sort of thing is going on all the time with every ordinary man, and we do not realize how absurdly we distort things. The duty of the theosophical student is to learn to see things as they are, and this means control, vigilance, and a very great deal of hard work. In the West, for example, people are very much prejudiced along religious lines, for we are born into a certain religion and sedulously taught that all others are superstitions. Our ideas therefore are biased from the first, and even when we do learn to know a little about other religions and respect them it would be difficult for us to imagine ourselves born into them. Those who are Hindus can scarcely think of themselves as being born as Christians or Mohammedans, and just in the same way the Christian or Mohammedan has an equal difficulty in thinking of himself as a Hindu or a Buddhist. Although it is practically certain that in some past life he has been in one or other of these religions. Many so-called Protestant Christians will not even now trust a Roman Catholic, and the more ignorant people are, the greater is their distrust of that to which they are unaccustomed. The peasantry, for example, have an instinctive distrust of all foreigners, and there are many country places in England where, let us say, a Frenchman, unless in poverty and needing help, would certainly be regarded with suspicion. If he is hungry he will be fed, and treated with compassion, but let him come as a fellow workman and all that he does will be criticized, laughed at, and suspected. Now of course all this comes from ignorance, and occurs because the peasantry are unaccustomed to meeting with foreigners. The removal of such prejudice is one of the great advantages gained by an intelligent man when he travels. In the Theosophical Society men of different nations are being drawn much more closely together. Indians are learning to trust white people, and white people in turn are learning that Indians are much the same as themselves. I was working in Amsterdam during the Boer War, and though in Holland generally there was a strong feeling at the time against England, there was never the slightest trace of it among the Dutch Theosophical members. It is most interesting to attend one of the European Theosophical conferences, and to see the really hearty good feeling which exists between men of different nations, how unfeignedly glad they are to see one another. And how they rejoice in one another's company. One sees at once that if such fellow feeling as exists between the members of the Theosophical Society could only spread to a majority of their fellow countrymen in the various nations, war would at once become a ridiculous impossibility. As things are now we form opinions on very slight grounds. You meet a person for the first time, and something that he says, or some trivial gesture, arouses in you a little dislike of him, so that there is a slight wall between you and him. This may seem an unimportant matter, yet if you are not careful that slight bias against the person will grow into a barrier which will forever prevent you from understanding him. To a certain extent you see him through this thought form that you have made, and you cannot see him correctly, for it is like looking through a twisted and colored glass which distorts everything. Sometimes, but not so often, a prejudice is in favor of the person, as in the case of a mother who can see no harm in what her child does, even though he may seriously harm others. Now whether they be against a person or in favor of him, both of these are equally prejudices, mental delusions which slay the real. The best way to see truly is to begin determinedly to look always for the good in every one, as our prejudices are generally on the other side, and we are sadly prone to see the evil where none exists. We differ from other people in color, in dress, in manners and customs, and in outer forms of religion, but all these are merely externals, and all that goes to make up the real man behind and beneath all this is much the same in us all. It is not after all so difficult to learn to look behind the outer shells in which people conceal themselves. Thereby they usually make the worst of themselves, for the main faults nearly always lie on the surface, and the real gold is often successfully concealed. One who aspires to make progress must overcome this blindness to the worth of others, this tendency to judge by surface characteristics. Remember that no one who desires to stand on the side of good as against evil can ever be refused the opportunity, no matter how ignorant or bigoted he may be. The masters always take the good and use it wherever it appears, even if there is in the same man much that is bad also, and their use of this force for good greatly helps the man who has generated it. For example, they will use the devotional force which is to be found even in a murderous fanatic, and thus they will allow him to do some good work and consequently to be helped. We also should imitate the great ones. We should always try to take the good in everything and everybody. Do not look for and accentuate the evil in any one, but select and emphasize the good. Go on doing your own work to the best of your ability, and do not trouble yourself about the work of another, or about how he is doing it. Even if other people make difficulties in your way, climb over them and do not worry. They are your karma, and after all these things from outside do not really matter. Do not make the mistake of thinking that others are trying to thwart your good purposes. All these people are much like yourself. Think of it, would you deliberately choose to do a wicked thing like that? Curiosity. Be so centered in your work that you have no time to find fault with others, or to pry into their affairs. If only each man would mind his own business, the world would be infinitely happier. This prying into other people's affairs works much of evil, and it is quite accurate to say that the person who does it is suffering from a disease. The man who is prying is not usually doing it for the purpose of helping, but simply to satisfy his curiosity about something which does not concern him, which is symptomatic of his disease. Another symptom is that the man cannot keep to himself the information which he has so nefariously acquired, but must everlastingly be pouring it out to others as foolish and as wicked as himself. For it is wicked beyond all doubt, this gossip, one of the wickedest things in the world. 99 times out of 100 what is said is an absolute fabrication, but it does an enormous amount of harm. It is not only the damage done to another person's reputation, that is the least part of the evil. The gossip and his pestilential cronies perpetually make thought forms of some evil quality which they choose to attribute to their victim, and then proceed to hurl them upon him in an unceasing stream. The natural effect of this will be to awaken in him the evil quality of which they accuse him, if there is anything at all in his nature which will respond to their malicious efforts. In the one case out of 100 in which there is some truth in their spiteful prattle, their thought forms intensify the evil, and so they pile up for themselves a store of the terrible karma which comes from leading a brother into sin. Theosophists especially should be careful to avoid these evils, because many of them are making some effort in the direction of developing psychic powers. And if they should use those for the purpose of prying into other people's affairs or for sending evil thoughts to them, their karma would be of the most terrible nature. Never speak unless you know, and not even then unless you are absolutely certain that some definite good will come of it. Before you speak, ask yourself about what you are going to say: is it true? Is it kind? Is it useful? And unless you can answer these 3 questions in the affirmative, your duty is to remain silent. I am well aware that an absolute following of this rule would reduce the conversation of the world by about 90%, but that would be an unspeakable advantage, and the world would advance much more rapidly. When we understand the underlying unity of all, we cannot be otherwise than helpful, we cannot stand aside from our brother's sorrow. Of course there may be many cases where physical aid is impossible, but at least we can always give the help of sympathy, compassion and love, and this is clearly our duty. For a man who realizes theosophy, harshness is impossible. Any member who acts roughly or coarsely is failing in his theosophy, and if he fails in patience he is failing in comprehension. To understand all is to forgive all, to love all. Every man has his own point of view, and the shortest road for one man is not by any means necessarily the best for another. Every man has a perfect right to take his own evolution in hand in his own way, and to do with regard to it what he chooses, so long as he does not cause suffering or inconvenience to anyone else. It is emphatically not our business to try to put everybody right, but only to see that all is right on our side in our relation with others. Before we undertake an effort to force someone else into our path, it will be best for us carefully to examine his, for it may be better for him. We ought to be always ready to help freely to the fullest extent of our power, but we ought never to interfere. Know thyself. The old Greek saying know thyself, know thyself, is a fine piece of advice, and self-knowledge is absolutely necessary to any candidate for progress. And yet we must beware lest our necessary self-examination should degenerate into morbid introspection, as it often does with some of the best of our students. Many people are constantly worrying themselves lest unawares they should be sliding back, as they call it. If they understood the method of evolution a little better, they would see that no one can slide back when the whole current is moving steadily forward. As a torrent comes rushing down a slope, many little eddies are formed behind rocks, or perhaps where the water is whirling round and round, and therefore for the moment some of it is moving backward. But yet the whole body of water, eddies and all, is being swept on in the rush of the torrent, so that even that which is apparently moving backwards in relation to the rest of the stream is really being hurried forward along with the rest. Even the people who are doing nothing towards their evolution, and let everything go as it will, are all the while gradually evolving, because of the irresistible force of the logos which is steadily pressing them onwards. But they are moving so slowly that it will take them millions of years of incarnation in trouble and uselessness to gain even a step. The method in which this is managed is delightfully simple and ingenious. All the evil qualities in man are vibrations of the lower matter of the respective planes. In the astral body, for example, selfishness, anger, hatred, jealousy, sensuality, and all qualities of this kind are invariably expressed by vibrations of the lower type of astral matter, while love, devotion, sympathy, and emotions of that class are expressed only in matter of the three higher subplanes. From this flow two remarkable results. It must be borne in mind that each subplane of the astral vehicle has a special relation to the corresponding subplane in the mental body. Or to put it more accurately, the four lower subplanes of the astral correspond to the four kinds matter in the mental body, while the three higher correspond to the causal vehicle. Therefore it will be seen that only higher qualities can be built into the causal body, since the vibrations created by the lower can find in it no matter which is capable of responding to them. Thence it emerges that while any good which the man develops within himself records itself permanently by a change in his causal body, the evil which he does and thinks and feels cannot possibly touch the real ego, but can only cause disturbance and trouble to the mental body, which is renewed for each fresh incarnation. Of course the result of this evil does store itself in the mental and astral permanent atoms, and so the man has to face it over and over again, but that is a very different matter from taking it into the ego and making it really a part of himself. The second remarkable result produced is that a certain amount of force directed towards good produces an enormously greater effect in proportion than the same amount of force directed towards evil. If a man throws a certain amount of energy into some evil quality, it has to express itself through the lower and heavier astral matter. And while any kind of astral matter is exceedingly subtle as compared with anything on the physical plane, yet as compared with the higher matter of its own plane it is just as gross as lead is on the physical plane when compared with the finest ether. If therefore a man should exert exactly the same amount of force in the direction of good, it would have to move through the much finer matter of these higher subplanes and would produce at least 100 times as much effect. Or if we compare the lowest with the highest, probably more than 1,000 times. Remember that even in addition to what has been said as to the effect of force in different grades of matter, we have the other great fact that the Logos himself is by his resistless power steadily pressing the whole system onwards and upwards. And that, however slow this cyclic progression may seem to us, it is a fact which cannot be neglected, for its effect is that a man who accurately balances his good and evil comes back, not to the same actual position, but to the same relative position, and therefore even he has made some slight advance, and is as it were in a position just a little than that which he has actually deserved and made for himself. It will be clear from these considerations that, if any one is so foolish as to want to get really backwards against the stream, he will have to work hard and definitely towards evil. There is no fear of sliding back. That is one of the old delusions which remains from the times of the belief in the orthodox devil, who was so much stronger than God that everything in the world was working in his favor. Really the exact opposite is the case, and everything round a man is calculated to assist him, if he only understands it. So many of our most conscientious people are just like the child who has a little garden of his own, and constantly pulls up his plants to see how the roots are growing, with the result of course that nothing grows at all. We must learn not to think of ourselves personally, nor of our personal progress, but enter the path of development, go on working for others to the best of our ability, and trust our progress to take care of itself. The more a scientist thinks about himself, the less mental energy he has for the problems of science. The more a devotee thinks about himself, the less devotion has he to lavish upon his object. Some self-examination is necessary, but it is a fatal mistake to spend too much time in self-examination. It is like spending all one's time in oiling and tinkering at the machinery. We use what faculties we have, and in the use of them others will develop and true progress will be made. If you are learning a language, for example, it is a mistake to try to learn it from books quite perfectly before you make any attempt to speak it. You must plunge into it, and make mistakes in it, and in the effort you will learn in due course to speak without mistake. So in the course of time what is called renunciation will come naturally, and even easily. No doubt when men first attempt to live the higher life they do definitely renounce many things which are pleasures to others, which still have a strong attraction even for them. But soon the man finds that the attraction of such pleasures has ceased, and that he has neither time nor inclination for the lower enjoyments. Learn above all things not to worry. Be happy, and make the best of everything. Try to raise yourself and help others. Contentment is not incompatible with aspirations. Optimism is justified by the certainty of the ultimate triumph of good, though if we take only the physical plane into account it is not easy to maintain that position. One's attitude in this matter depends chiefly upon the level at which one habitually keeps one's consciousness. If it is centered chiefly in the physical plane one sees little but the misery, but when it becomes possible to center it at a higher level the joy beyond always shines through. I know the Buddha said that life was misery, and it is quite true on the whole with regard to the manifested life down here. Yet the Greeks and Egyptians managed to extract much joy even from this lower life by taking it from the philosophical point of view. We never lose anything by making the best of things, but gain very much in happiness and in the power of making others happy. As our sympathy and our love grow we shall be able to receive within ourselves all the streams of emotion and of thought which come to us from others, and yet we shall remain within ourselves unaffected, calm and joyous. Like the great ocean which receives the waters of many rivers and yet remains always in equilibrium. The inner life of an aspirant ought not to be one of continual oscillation. Outer moods change constantly because they are affected by all sorts of outside influences. If you find yourself depressed, it may be due to any one of half a dozen reasons, none of them of any real importance. The physical body is a fertile source of such ills. A trifling indigestion, a slight congestion in the circulation, or a little over-fatigue may account for many conditions which feel quite serious. Even more frequently depression is caused by the presence of some astral entity who is himself depressed, and is hovering round you either in search of sympathy or in the hope of drawing from you the vitality which he lacks. We must simply learn to disregard depression altogether, to throw it off as a sin and a crime against our neighbors, which it really is. But, anyhow, whether we can succeed fully in dispersing its clouds or not we must learn simply to go on as though it were not there. Your mind is your own mind, into which you should allow entrance only to such thoughts as you, the ego, choose. Your astral body is also your own, and you should not allow in it any sensations except those which are good for the higher self. So you must manage these vibrations of depression, and absolutely decline to give harborage to them. They must not be allowed to impinge upon you. If they do so impinge they must not be permitted to effect a lodgment. If, to some slight extent, in spite of your efforts, they do hang about you, then it is your duty to ignore them and to let no one else know that they even exist. Sometimes people tell me they have had moments of splendid inspiration and exaltation, and glowing devotion and joy. They do not realize that these are precisely the moments when the higher self succeeds in impressing himself upon the lower, and that all that which they feel is there all the time, but the lower self is not always conscious of it. Realize by reason and by faith that it is always there, and it becomes as though we felt it, even in the time when the link is imperfect and down here we feel it not. But many a man, while admitting the truth of this in the abstract, yet says that he cannot perpetually feel this happiness because of his own defects and constant failures. His attitude in fact is very much that adopted in the litany, "Have mercy upon us miserable sinners." Now we are all sinners in the sense that we all fall short of what we ought to do, and constantly do what we ought not to do, and constantly do what we ought not to do, but there is no need to aggravate the offense by being miserable sinners. A miserable person is a public nuisance, because he is a center of infection, and is spreading misery and sorrow all round upon his unfortunate neighbors, a thing which no man has a right to do. Any man with just the same feelings, who contrives to keep himself reasonably happy even while making determined efforts to reform, is not injuring others in at all the same way. People who think and speak of themselves as miserable worms are going exactly the right way to make themselves miserable worms, for what a man thinks, that he is. All such talk is usually hypocrisy, as you may easily see from the fact that the man who so readily calls himself a miserable worm in church would feel distinctly insulted if anybody else called him so in ordinary daily life. And whether it is hypocritical or not, it is certainly nonsense, for we passed the reptilian stage of evolution long ago, if we ever were in it. Anyone who understands at all the influence of thought will realize that a man who really thinks himself a miserable worm has already deprived himself of any power of rising out of that state. While the man who realizes strongly that he is a spark of the divine life will feel ever hopeful and joyous, because in essence the divine is always joy. It is a great mistake to waste time repentance. What is past, and no amount of remorse can undo it. As one of our own masters once said, the only repentance that is worth anything whatever is the resolve not to do it again. Asceticism. Some mistaken ideas seem prevalent among our members upon the subject of asceticism, and it may be worthwhile to consider what it really is, and how far it may be useful. The word is usually taken to signify a life of austerities and of mortification of the body, though this is somewhat of a departure from the original meaning of the Greek word ascetes, which is simply one who exercises himself as an athlete does. But ecclesiasticism impounded the word and changed its sense, applying it to the practice of all sorts of self-denial for the purpose of spiritual progress. On the theory that the bodily nature with its passions and desires is the stronghold of the evil inherent in man since the fall of Adam, and that it must therefore be suppressed by fasting and penance. In the grander Oriental religions we sometimes encounter a similar idea, based on the conception of matter as essentially evil. And following from that the deduction that an approach to ideal good or an escape from the miseries of existence can be effected only by subduing or torturing the body. The student of theosophy will at once see that in both these theories there is dire confusion of thought. There is no evil inherent in man except such as he has himself generated in previous births. Nor is matter essentially evil, since it is just as much divine as is spirit, and without it all manifestation of the deity would be impossible. The body and its desires are not in themselves evil or good, but it is true that before real progress can be made they must be brought under the control of the higher self within. To torture the body is foolish, to govern it is necessary. The men who perform severe austerities, unintelligent, tormenting the aggregated elements forming the body, and me also, seated in the inner body, know these demoniacal in their resolves. Bhagavad Gita, 17, 5, 6. And again, the austerity done under a deluded understanding, with self-torture, that is declared of darkness. Ibid, 17, 19. There appears to be a widely spread delusion that to be really good one must always be uncomfortable, that discomfort as such is directly pleasing to the logos. Nothing can be more grotesque than this idea, and in the above quoted texts from the Bhagavad Gita we have a hint that it is perhaps worse than grotesque, for it is there said that they who torment the body are tormenting the logos enshrined in it. With us in Europe this unfortunately common theory is one of the many horrible legacies left us by the ghastly blasphemy of Calvinism. I myself have actually heard a child say, "I feel so happy that I am sure I must be very wicked," a truly awful result of criminally distorted teaching. Our masters, who are so far above us, are full of joy, full of sympathy, but not of sorrow. We also must feel sympathy with others, but not identify ourselves with their sorrow. A man in great trouble can judge nothing clearly. To his vision all the world seems dark, and it appears as if no one should be happy. When he is in great joy, all the world appears bright, and it seems as if no one ought to be unhappy. Yet nothing is changed, not even he himself, but only his astral body. All the world is going on just the same, whether you are happy or unhappy. Do not identify yourself with your astral body, but try to get out of this web of illusion, these personal moods. No doubt this ludicrous theory of the merit of discomfort comes partly from the knowledge that in order to make progress man must control his passions, and from the fact that such control is disagreeable to the unevolved person. But the discomfort is very far from being meritorious, on the contrary, it is a sign that the victory is not yet achieved. It arises from the fact that the lower nature is not yet dominated, and that a struggle is still taking place. When the control is perfect, there will no longer be any desire for the lower, consequently no struggle and no discomfort. The man will live the right life and avoid the lower because it is perfectly natural for him to do so, no longer because he thinks he ought to make the effort, even though it may be difficult for him. So that the discomfort exists only at an intermediate stage, and not it, but its absence, is the sign of success. Another reason for the gospel of the uncomfortable is a confusion of cause and effect. It is observed that the really advanced person is simple in his habits, and often careless about a large number of minor luxuries that are considered important and really necessary by the ordinary man. But such carelessness about luxury is the effect, not the cause, of his advancement. He does not trouble himself about these little matters because he has largely outgrown them and they no longer interest him, not in the least because he considers them as wrong. And one who, while still craving for them, imitates him in abstaining from them, does not thereby become advanced. At a certain stage a child plays with dolls and bricks, a few years later he has become a boy and his play is cricket and football. Later again when he is a young man these in turn lose much of their interest, and he begins to play the game of love and life. But an infant who chooses to imitate his elders, who throws aside his dolls and brick and attempts to play cricket, does not thereby transcend his infancy. As his natural growth takes place he puts away childish things. But he cannot force the growth merely by putting these away, and playing at being older. There is no virtue whatever merely in becoming uncomfortable for discomfort's sake. But there are three cases in which voluntary discomfort may be a part of progress. The first is when it is undertaken for the sake of helping another, as when a man nurses a sick friend or labors hard to support his family. The second is when a man realizes that some habit to which he is addicted is a hindrance in his upward way, such a habit, say, as tobacco smoking, alcohol drinking, or corpse eating. If he is in earnest he gives up the habit instantly, but because the body is accustomed to that particular form of pollution it misses it, cries out for it, and causes the man a great deal of trouble. If he holds firm to his resolution his body will presently adapt itself to the new conditions, and when it has done so there will be no further discomfort. But in the intermediate stage, while the battle for mastery between the man and his body is still being fought, there may be a good deal of suffering, and this must be taken as the karma of having adopted the vice which he is now forsaking. When the suffering passes the karma is paid, the victory is won, and a step in evolution is achieved. I am aware that there are rare cases, when people are physically very weak, in which it might be dangerous to relinquish a bad habit instantaneously. The morphine habit is an instance in point. One who is a victim to its horrors usually finds it necessary gradually to decrease the dose, because the strain of abrupt cessation might well be great than the physical body could endure. It would seem that there are certain pitiable cases in which the same system of gradual decrease must be applied to the flesh-eating habit. Doctrine tells us that while the digestion of flesh takes place chiefly in the stomach, that of most forms of vegetable food belongs to the work of the intestines. And therefore a person in very weak health sometimes finds it advisable to give to these various organs a certain amount of time to adjust themselves to the necessary change, and to practice, as it were, the functions which they are now required to fulfill. The steady pressure of the will, however, will soon bring the body into subjection and adapt it to the new order of things. The third cases in which discomfort may have its use is when a man deliberately forces his body to do something which it dislikes, in order to make sure that it will obey him when necessary. But it must be distinctly understood that even then the merit is in the ready obedience of the body, and not in its suffering. In the way a man may gradually learn indifference to many of the minor ills of life, and so save himself much worry and irritation. In this training himself in will, and his body in obedience, he must be careful to attempt only such things as are advantageous. The Hatha yogi develops willpower, assuredly, when he holds his arm above his head until it withers. But while he gains enormously in willpower he also loses the use of his arm. The willpower can be developed just as well by some effort the result of which will be permanently useful instead of permanently hampering, by the conquest, for example, of irritability, or pride, impatience or sensuality. It would be well if all who feel a yearning for asceticism would take to heart the words of wisdom in the Bhagavad Gita. Purity, straightforwardness, continence and harmlessness are called the austerity of the body. Speech causing no annoyance, truthful, pleasant and beneficial, is called the austerity of speech. Mental happiness, equilibrium, silence, self-control, purity of nature, this is called the austerity of the mind. 17, 14, 15, 16. Note especially that in this last verse mental happiness is described as the first characteristic of the austerity of the mind, the first sign of the perfect self-control necessary for one who wishes to make real progress. It is emphatically our duty to be happy. Morbidity, gloom or depression mean always failure and weakness, because they mean selfishness. The man who allows himself to brood over his own sorrows or wrongs is forgetting his duty to his fellows. He permits himself to become a center of infection, spreading gloom instead of joy among his brethren. What is this but the grossest selfishness? If there be anyone who feels a yearning for asceticism, let him take up this mental austerity advised in the scripture, and resolve that whatever may be his private troubles or sufferings he will forget himself and them for the sake of others. So that he may ever be pouring forth upon his fellow pilgrims the radiant happiness which comes from the fuller knowledge of the Theosophist, ever helping them towards the realization that Brahman is bliss. Small worries. Unnecessary worry appears to be the keynote of modern life. Not only those who are making special efforts to progress are making themselves unreasonably uncomfortable, but the same vice is quite common even in ordinary life. The astral body of the average man is a sad sight for a clairvoyant. The illustration in Man Visible and Invisible, p. 131, shows what an astral body ought to be, merely a reflection of the colors of the mental, indicating that the man allows himself to feel only what his reason dictates. But if that be too much to expect at this stage of evolution, the picture on page 102 gives us an assortment of colors which represents an average astral body when comparatively at rest. In it there are many hues which show the presence of undesirable qualities, qualities which should be weeded out as soon as may be, but that side of the subject is treated in the book, and it is to another feature that I wish now to draw attention. I have said that the illustration shows what an ordinary undeveloped astral body would look like if comparatively at rest. But one of the evils of what we have agreed to call civilization is that hardly any astral body ever is even comparatively at rest. Of course it is understood that the matter of an astral body must always be in perpetual vibration, and each of the colors that we see in the drawing marks a different rate of that vibration. But there should be a certain order in this, and a certain limit to it. The more developed man, on page 131, has 5 rates of vibration, but the ordinary man shows at least 9 rates, with a mixture of varying shades in addition. That is clearly not so good as the other, but the case of the majority of people in the West is really far worse than that. To have even 9 rates of simultaneous vibration is already bad enough, but in the astral body of many a man and woman one might easily observe 50 rates or even 100. The body should be divided into a few fairly definite areas, each swinging steadily at its normal rate, but instead of that, its surface is usually broken up into a multiplicity of little whirlpools and cross-currents, all battling one against the other in the maddest confusion. All these are the result of little unnecessary emotions and worries, and the ordinary person of the West is simply a mass of these. He is troubled about this thing, he is annoyed about that, he is in fear about a third, and so on. His whole life is filled with petty little emotions, and all his strength is frittered away on them. A really great emotion, be it good or bad, sweeps over the whole of a man's astral body and for the time brings it all to one rate of vibration. But these small worries make little vortices or centers of local disturbance, each of which persists for a considerable time. The astral body which thus vibrates 50 ways at once is a blot upon the landscape and a nuisance to its neighbors. It is not only a very ugly object, it is also a serious annoyance. It may be compared to a physical body suffering from some unusually aggravated form of palsy, with all its muscles jerking simultaneously in different directions. But to make the illustration even partially adequate, we should have to assume that this palsy was contagious, or that everyone who saw its unfortunate results felt an irresistible tendency to reproduce them. For this horrible chaos of catastrophic confusion produces an unpleasant and most disturbing effect upon all sensitive people who approach it. It infects their astral bodies and communicates to them a painful sensation of unrest and worry. Only a few have yet unfolded the faculties which enable them to see this maleficent influence in action. A larger number are vaguely conscious of discomfort when they approach one of these fussy persons. But probably the majority feel nothing definite at the time of meeting, though later in the day they will probably wonder why they are so inexplicably fatigued. The effect is there and the harm is done, whether it be immediately perceptible or not. A person who is so foolish as to allow himself to get into this condition does much harm to many, but most of all to himself. Frequently the perpetual astral disturbance reacts through the etheric upon the dense physical vehicle, and all sorts of nervous diseases are produced. Nearly all nerve troubles are the direct result of unnecessary worry and emotion, and would soon disappear if the patient would but hold his vehicle still and possess his soul in peace. But even cases where a strong physical body is able successfully to resist this constant irritation from the astral, its effect upon its own plane is no less disastrous. These tiny centers of inflammation which thus cover the whole astral body are to it what boils are to the physical body, not only themselves causes of acute discomfort, sore spots the least touch upon which produces terrible pain, but also weak spots through which the life-blood of vitality drains away, and through which also blood poisoning from without may take place. A person whose astral body is in this distracted condition can offer practically no resistance to any evil influence which he may encounter, while he is quite unable to profit by good influences. His strength flows out through these open sores, at the same time that all sorts of disease germs find entrance by them. He is not using and controlling his astral body as a whole, but allowing it to break up into a number of separate centers and control him. His little worries and vexations establish themselves and confirm their empire over him until they become a legion of devils who possess him so that he cannot escape from them. This is a painfully common condition. How is a man to avoid falling into it, and if he is already in it, how is he to get out of it? The answer is the same to both questions. Let him learn and not to worry, not to fear, not to be annoyed. Let him reason with himself as to the utter unimportance of all these little personal matters which have loomed so large upon his horizon. Let him consider how they will appear when he looks back upon them from the next life, or even 20 years hence. Let him lay well to heart the words of wisdom, that of all the outward things that happen to a man nothing matters much, and most things matter not at all. What he himself does or says or thinks is of importance to him, for that forms his future. What other people do or say or think matters to him nothing whatever. Let him abstract himself from all these little pinpricks of daily life, and simply decline to be worried by them. It will need some resolution at first, for it requires effort to conquer a well-established bad habit. He will find his mind muttering to him over and over again, "Mrs. Jones spoke evil of me, perhaps she is doing it now. Perhaps other people may believe her, perhaps it may do me harm," and so on ad infinitum. But he must reply, "I don't care what Mrs. Jones has said, though I am sorry the poor woman should make such bad karma. I absolutely decline to think of it or of her. I have my work to do, and have no time to waste in thinking of foolish gossip." Or it may be that forebodings of coming evil are constantly thrusting themselves into his brain. Perhaps next year I may lose my position, perhaps I shall be starving, perhaps I shall be bankrupt, perhaps I may lose the affection of some friend. This also should be met firmly. Perhaps all these things may happen, but also perhaps they may not, and it is useless to try to cross a bridge before one come to it. I shall take all reasonable precautions, and when that is done I decline to think further of the matter. Worrying cannot affect whatever may be coming, but it can and certainly will make me unfit to meet it. Therefore I refuse to worry. I definitely turn my back on the whole subject. Another common form of worry which leads to the most serious results is the folly of taking offense at something which somebody else says or does. Ordinarily common sense would lead a man to avoid this mistake, and yet those who do avoid it are few. It needs only that we should think dispassionately about the matter, and we shall see that what the other man has said or done cannot make any difference to us. If he has said something which has hurt our feelings, we may be sure that in 9 cases out of 10 he has not meant it to be offensive. Why then should we allow ourselves to be disturbed about the matter? Even in the rare cases when a remark is intentionally rude or spiteful, where a man has said something purposely to wound another, it is still exceedingly foolish of that other to allow himself to feel hurt. If the man had an evil intention in what he said, he is much to be pitied, for we know that under the law of divine justice he will certainly suffer for his foolishness. What he has said need in no way affect us, for, if we think of it, no effect whatever has really been produced. The irritating word does not in any way injure us, except in so far as we may choose to take it up and injure ourselves by brooding over it or allowing ourselves to be wounded in our feelings. What are the words of another, that we should let our serenity be disturbed by them? They are merely a vibration in the atmosphere. If it had not happened that we heard them, or heard of them, would they have affected us? If not, then it is obviously not the words that have injured us, but the fact that we heard them. So if we allow ourselves to care about what a man has said, it is we who are responsible for the disturbance treated in our astral bodies, and not he. The man has done and can do nothing that can harm us. If we feel hurt and injured and thereby make ourselves a great deal of trouble, we have only ourselves to thank for it. If a disturbance arises within our astral bodies in reference to what he has said, that is merely because we have not yet gained control over those bodies. We have not yet developed the calmness which enables us to look down as soul upon all this, and go on our way and attend to our own work without taking the slightest notice of foolish or spiteful remarks made by other men. This is the merest common sense, yet not 1 in 100 will act upon it. That fact is that anyone who wished to become a student of occultism must not have any personal feelings that can be offended under any circumstances whatever. A man who has them is still thinking of himself, whereas our duty is to forget ourselves in order to remember the good of others. Nothing can offend you if you have resolved not to be offended, if you are thinking only how to help the other man, and not at all of yourself. Another variant of the disease is less personal and therefore is so far less blameworthy, but hardly less prejudicial to progress. It is the habit of fussing over trifles in business or in household affairs. This always involves a lack of discrimination and of the sense of perspective. It is quite true that a household or a business must be orderly, that things must be done punctually and exactly. But the way to achieve this is to set up a high ideal and press steadily towards it, not to irritate everyone by ceaseless, useless worry. The person who is so unfortunate as to be afflicted with a disposition of this kind should make a most determined fight against it, for until he conquers it he will be a force working always for friction and not for peace. And so will be of little real use in the world. His symptoms differ slightly from those of the more personal worrier. In his case there are fewer of the carbuncular vortices, but there is a perpetual tremor, an unrest of the whole astral body which is equally disquieting to others, equally subversive of happiness and advancement for the fusser himself. The man must learn to be master of his mind and his feelings, and steadily reject every thought and emotion which his highest self does not approve. A chaos of petty emotions is unworthy of a rational being, and it is to the last degree undignified that man, who is a spark of the divine, should allow himself to fall under the sway of his desire elemental, a thing that is not even a mineral yet. I have already said that this disastrous astral confusion is often prejudicial to physical health, but it is invariably worse than prejudicial to progress on the path. It is absolutely fatal to it. One of the first great lessons to be learnt on that path is perfect self-control, and a long stage on the way to that is complete absence of worry. At first, from mere habit, the matter of the astral body will still be swept readily into unnecessary vortices, but every time that happens the man must firmly obliterate them, and restore the steady swing of the feelings which he, as an ego, really desires to have. Let him fill himself so entirely with the divine love that it may be ever pouring from him in all directions in the shape of love for his fellow men, and then there will be no room for unnecessary vibrations. He will have no time to worry over trifling personal matters if his whole life is spent in the service of the Logos, in trying to help forward the evolution of the world. To make any real progress or to do any real work, a man must turn from the lower and reach towards the higher. He must come out of our world into theirs, out of the restlessness into the peace which passeth understanding. Killing out desire. We are often told that we must kill out desire, but it should be remembered that that is a gradual process. The lower and coarser desire which are meant by the Sanskrit word kama must certainly be killed out entirely before any sort of advancement can be made, but in the English sense of the word we all of us still have certain desire. And are likely to have them for a very long time to come. We desire keenly, for example, to serve the Master, to become his pupils, to help humanity. These also are desires, but they should not be killed. What is necessary is to kill out the lower and reach up to the higher, that is to say, to purify our desires and to transmute them into aspirations. Later on another transmutation will take place. For example, now we desire to make progress. But a time will come when we shall be so sure of it that we shall cease to desire, because we know that all the time it is going on as rapidly as is possible for us, and because we mean that it shall so go on. Desire is then transmuted into resolution. At this point there can be no more regret for anything. You do your best and you know that in response to that the best must come. Some people desire earnestly to gain this quality or that. Do not waste your power in desiring and wishing, but will instead. In the same way it is said that we should slay the lunar form, that is to say the astral body. But that does not mean that the astral body must be destroyed or that we must be without feelings and emotions. If that could be so we should have no sympathy and no understanding of others. What is intended is that we should keep it completely under control, that we should have the faculty to slay the lunar form at will. Purity is necessary, but it means not only the abstinence from specified faults, but absolute selflessness. Ambition, for example, is a very common form of desire, but in it there is always a thought of self. The adept cannot be ambitious. His will is one with the will of the Logos, and he wills evolution. We are all parts of the Logos, and our wills are part of his. It is only when we do not realize this that we set up desires in our own separate lines. The regulations for our lives were very well summed up by the Lord Buddha in one little verse of 4 short lines. Sabapapasa akaranam. Kusalasa upasampada. Sakita pariyo dapanam. Etam budhana sasanam. Cease from all evil. Learn to do well. Cleanse your own heart. This is the religion of the Buddhas. The center of my circle. Of all the many obstacles that stand in the way of the aspirant who wishes to enter upon the path, the most serious, because the most far-reaching and fundamental, is self-centeredness. Note that by this I do not mean the crude and ugly selfishness, which definitely seeks everything for itself even at the cost of others. I am, of course, supposing that at least has been left behind long ago. But in those who have left it behind, there still lingers this other evil, so subtle and so deeply rooted that they do not recognize it as an evil at all, indeed, they are not even aware of its existence. But let a man examine himself honestly and impartially, and he will find that all his thought is self-centered. He thinks often of other people and of other things, but always in their relation to himself. He weaves many imaginary dramas, but he himself occupies always a prominent role in them. He must always be in the center of his little stage, with the limelight playing upon him. If he is not in that position he at once feels hurt, annoyed, angry, and jealous of any other person who happens for the moment to be attracting the attention of those who ought to be worshipping at his shrine. To change so fundamental a quality is to change for him the root of all things, to make himself into an altogether different man. Most people cannot for a moment face the possibility of such a radical change because they do not even know that the condition exists. Now, this attitude is absolutely fatal to any kind of progress. It must be utterly changed, and yet so few are making any attempt to change it. There is one way out of this vicious circle, and only one, and that is the way of love. That is the only thing in the life of the ordinary man which ever changes this condition for him, which seizes upon him with a strong hand and for the time being alters his whole attitude. For a time, at least, when he falls in love, as it is called, some other person occupies the center of his circle, and he thinks of everything in all the world in its relation to her, and not in its relation to himself. The divinity at whose shrine he offers this worship may in truth seem to the rest of the world to be but a very ordinary person, but for him she is temporarily the incarnation of grace and beauty. He sees in her the divinity which is in truth hers, because it lies latent in all of us, though normally we do not see it. It is true that in many cases after a time his enthusiasm fades and he transfers it to another object. But nevertheless for the time he has ceased to be self-centered, for the time he has had a wider outlook. Now this, which the ordinary man thus does unconsciously, the student of occultism must do consciously. He must deliberately dethrone himself from the center of the circle of his life, and he must enthrone the master there instead. He has been in the habit of thinking instinctively how everything will affect him, or what he can make of it, how he can turn it to his profit and pleasure. Instead of that he must now learn to think of everything as it affects the master, and since the master lives only to help the evolution of humanity. That means that he must regard everything from the standpoint of its helpfulness or hindrance to the cause of evolution. And though at first he will have to do this consciously and with a certain effort, he must persevere until he does it just as unconsciously, just as instinctively as heretofore he centered everything around himself. To use the words of a master, he must forget himself utterly only to remember the good of other. But even when he has dethroned himself and enthroned the work which he has to do, he must be exceedingly careful that he does not delude himself, that he does not return to the old self-centeredness in a subtler form. Many a good and earnest theosophical worker have I known who committed this very mistake, who identified theosophical work with himself, and felt that anyone who did not exactly agree with his ideas and his methods was an enemy of theosophy. So often the worker thinks that his way is the only way, and that to differ from him in opinion is to be a traitor to the cause. But this means only that the self has crept skillfully back into its old place in the center of the circle, and that the work of dislodging it must be begun all over again. The only power which the disciple should desire is that which makes him seem as nothing in the eyes of men. When he is the center of his circle he may do good work, but it is always with the feeling that he is doing it, even largely with the object that it may be he that does it. But when the master is the center of his circle he will do the work simply in order that it may be done. The work is done for the sake of the work and not for the sake of the doer. And he must learn to look upon his own work precisely as though it were that of someone else, and upon the work of someone else precisely as though it were his own. The one thing that is important is that the work should be done. It matters little who does it. Therefore, he ought neither to be prejudiced in favor of his own work and unduly critical of that of another, nor be hypocritically depreciatory of his own work in order that others may praise it. To quote the words of Ruskin with regard to art, he ought to be able to say serenely, be it mine or yours, or whose else it may, this also is well. Another danger there is, too, which is special to the theosophical worker, the danger of congratulating himself too soon that he differs from the rest of the world. Theosophical teaching puts a new complexion upon everything, so naturally we feel that our attitude is quite different from that of most other people. There is no harm in thinking this obvious truth, but I have found that some of our members are apt to pride themselves upon the fact that they are able to recognize these things. It does not in the least follow that we, who find ourselves able to recognize them are, therefore, better than others. Others men have developed themselves along other lines, and along those lines they may be very far in advance of us, though along our line they may be very far in advance of us, though along our line they lack something which we already have. Remember, the adept is the perfect man who is fully developed along all possible lines, and so while we have something to teach these others we also have much to learn from them. And it would be the height of folly to despise a man because he has not yet acquired theosophical knowledge, nor even perhaps the qualities which enable him to appreciate it. Therefore, in this sense also we must take care not to be the center of our own circle. A good plan that you may adopt in order to keep yourself from slipping back into the center may be to remember, as a symbol of what ought to be your attitude. What I have before explained to you with regard to the occult view of the course and influence of the planets. You remember how I explained to you that each planet is a minor focus in an ellipse, the major focus of which is within the body of the Sun. You are like that minor focus. You are going upon your own course and doing the work appointed to you, and yet all the time you are but a reflection of the major focus, and your consciousness is centered within the Sun. For the Master of whom you are a part is a member of the great hierarchy which is ever doing the work of the Logos. While a man is the center of his own circle, he is perpetually making the mistake of thinking that he is the center of everybody else's. He constantly supposes that in everything which other people say or do they are somehow thinking of him, or aiming their remarks at him, and with many this becomes a kind of obsession. And they seem totally unable to realize that each of their neighbors is as a rule also entirely wrapped up in himself and not thinking of them at all. So the man makes for himself a great deal of totally unnecessary trouble and worry, all of which might be avoided if we would but see things in a sane and rational perspective. Again, it is because he is the center of his own circle that he is liable to depression, for that comes only to one who is thinking of himself. If the Master be the center of his circle, and all his energies are centered upon serving him, he has no time for depression, nor has he the slightest inclination towards it. He is far too eagerly wishing for work that he can do. His attitude should be that indicated by our President in her autobiography, that when a man sees a piece of work waiting to be done he should say, not as the ordinary man usually does, yes, it would be a good thing, and somebody ought to do it. But why should I? But rather he should say, somebody ought to do this. Why should it not be I? As he evolves his circle will widen, and in the end there will come a time when his circle will be infinite in extent, and then in a sense he himself will again be its center, because he has identified himself with the Logos. Who is the center of all possible circles, since every point is equally the center of a circle whose radius is infinite. Our duty to animals. While you are trying to do your best for all those around you, do not forget that you also have a duty towards forms of life lower than the human. In order that you may be able to do that, try to understand your lower brothers, try to understand the animals, just as you try to understand on a higher level the children with whom you have to deal. Just as you learn, if you want to help a child, to look at things from the child's point of view, so, if you want to help the animal evolution, try to see what is the animal's point of view. In all cases and with all forms of life our business is to love and to help, and to try to bring nearer the golden age when all shall understand one another and all shall cooperate in the glorious work that is to come. There is no reason why our domestic animals should not be trained to help man, and to work in his service, so long as the work is not painful or excessive. But all the creatures around us should be trained in the way best for themselves. That is to say, we should always remember that their evolution is the object of the divine will. So that while we should surely teach our animals all that we can, because that develops their intelligence, we must take care that we instill into them good qualities and not evil. We have various creatures brought among us. We have the dog, the cat, the horse and other originally wild animals given into our care, brought to us for affection and help. Why? That we may train them out of their ferocity, and into a higher and more intelligent state of life, that we may evoke in them devotion, affection, and intellect. But we must take good care that we help, not hinder. We must see that we do not increase in our animal the ferocious qualities which it is the business of his evolution to get rid of. For example, a man who trains a dog to hunt and kill is intensifying within him the very instincts which must be eliminated if the animal is to evolve. And in this way he is degrading a creature given into his charge instead of helping him on his way, even though at the same time he may be developing the animal's intelligence. And thus, though he may do a little good, he is at the same time doing a great deal of harm which far more than counterbalances it. The same thing is true of a man who trains his dog to be ferocious in order that he may be an efficient protector of his property. A man who treats an animal harshly or cruelly may possibly be evolving his intellect, since the animal may learn to think more keenly in order to see how to avoid the cruelty. But along with whatever evolution may be gained in this way, there is also the development of the exceedingly undesirable qualities of fear and hatred. Thus when, later on, that animal wave of life goes up into humanity, we shall have a humanity starting terribly handicapped, starting with these awful qualities of fear and hatred ingrained in it, instead of a humanity all aspiring, devotional, loving and gentle, such as we might have had if the men to whom the animal part of that evolution was committed had done their duty. We have also our duty towards other and even lower forms of life than that. There is the elemental essence, which is surrounding us everywhere. That elemental essence progresses by means of our thought, and of the action which we produce upon it by our thoughts, passions, emotions and feelings. We need not trouble ourselves especially about that, because if we carry out our higher ideals, if we try to see to it that all our thought and all our emotion shall be of the highest possible type, then that also will, at the same time and without further difficulty, be the discharging of our duty towards the elemental essences which are influenced by our thought. They will be raised and not depressed, the higher qualities which we alone can reach will be set in motion, vivified and helped at their respective levels. All through evolution the assistance of the higher is expected in the development of the lower, and it is not only by individualizing them that man has helped the members of the animal kingdom. In Atlantean days the very formation of their species was largely given over into his hands, and it is because he failed to do his duty properly that many things turned out rather differently from what was originally intended. His mistakes are largely responsible for the existence of carnivorous creatures which live only to destroy one another. Not that he was responsible for all carnivorous creatures. There were such among the gigantic reptiles of the Lemurian period, and man was not in any way directly engaged in their evolution. But it was in part his work to assist in the development from those reptile forms of the mammalia which play so prominent a part in the world now. Here was his opportunity to improve the breeds and to curb the undesirable qualities of the creatures that came under his hands. And it is because he failed to do all that he might have done in this direction that he is to some extent responsible for much that has since gone wrong in the world. If he had done all his duty it is quite conceivable that we might have had no carnivorous mammals. Mankind has for so long treated animals cruelly that the whole animal world has a general feeling of fear and enmity towards men. Men have generated in this way an awful karma, which comes back upon them in terrible suffering, in various forms of disease and of insanity. Yet, even after all this bad behavior on the part of man, few animals will harm him if left alone. A serpent, for example, will not usually do any injury to a human being, unless he is first hurt or frightened. And the same thing is true of nearly all wild animals, except the very few who may regard man as food, and even they usually will not touch man if they can get anything else. Except when it is absolutely necessary in self-defense or in defense of another, the destruction of any form of life ought always to be avoided, as it tends to retard nature's work. That is one of the reasons why all consistent theosophists refuse to share the sin of slaughter by eating meat or fish, or by wearing such things as are obtained only by the slaughter of animals, like sealskin or the feathers of birds. Silk used to be obtained by the wholesale slaughter of silkworms, but I hear that there is now a new way of obtaining it without destroying the worm. Sympathy. Never set yourself against the law of nature. Lately, man has gone astray from nature very much, and materialism has become widely spread. Many scientific men who know a great deal more about nature are very much less in sympathy with her than were their less instructed forefathers. In the useful, and indeed necessary, study of the exterior many have forgotten the interior. But men will pass through this intermediate stage of misunderstanding and come back into sympathy. The older people, who had a closer kinship with nature, carried on little of detailed examination, which would have seemed irreverent to them. Because we have become irreverent, have lost the living feeling, we pry remorselessly. We must take care not to lose the precision that we have gained by this intermediate stage, but must recover the sympathy. By sympathy one may find out a great deal which science alone can never discover. In the teaching of children, we need to make them feel that we understand them, even though in doing so we may sacrifice some scholastic advantages. The average child regards grown-up people as foreign entities, strange arbitrary beings. All this is true also in connection with our studies of nature. The nature spirits are afraid of us, if we study them too scientifically. We must go with them into their life, and then they will be interested in the life of humanity also. In their blind way, flowers and other things feel joy and friendliness. Emerson said that it appeared to him that when he returned home, the trees in his garden felt glad to see or feel him again, and no doubt it was quite true. The trees and animals do know the people who love them. In India people speak of the lucky hand in planting, meaning that things will grow for some people, but not for others. One must be in sympathy with the purpose of the logos. If we are actively helping in the progress of all, we are living in His will, which penetrates nature, and this is felt by nature at once, but if we put ourselves in opposition to evolution, nature shrinks back from us like a sensitive child. Our attitude towards children. What is your attitude towards your children? Remember that these are egos, sparks of the divine life. They have been entrusted to you, not that you may domineer over them and brutally ill-treat them, and use them for your own profit and advantage, but that you may love them and help them in order that they may be expressions of that divine life. What an outpouring of love then you ought to feel. How beyond all words your patience and compassion should be. How deeply you should feel the honor of being trusted to serve them in this way. Remember always that you are not the older and they the younger, but that as souls you are all about the same age, and therefore your attitude must not be that of a selfish and cruel dictator, but of a helpful friend. You do not regard your friend differently when he puts on a new coat. Remember therefore that when you meet a child you are meeting a soul wearing a new coat, and you should try by perfect kindness and love to draw out the best that is in it, and to help it to fit on its new coat. Remember always that true good means good for all, and that good is never gained at the cost of suffering to others. That which is so gained is not really good at all. The fear of death. The fear of death is a stern reality in the minds of many people. A far larger number suffer from it than one would suppose, and still more from the fear of what may happen to us after death. Naturally this is especially to be found among people who have ideas of hell, and of probable punishment if they do not believe this or that. It is a gross and degraded form of superstition, but still the suffering is real, and what is even worse is the fear as to the fate of others after death. Many a mother's whole life is embittered by doubts and fears as to what may happen to her son. He goes far away from her, perhaps, he falls into the ordinary habits of men of the world, and does many things contrary to the narrow religious teaching in which she has been brought up, and so she thinks that he must suffer eternal torture. While it is true that there is no eternal hell for him, there is certainly much real earthly suffering for her. But we know the law of karma, and realize that the states after death are simply a continuation of the life which we are now living, although on a higher plane and without a physical body. And when in addition we learn that what we commonly call life is only one day in the real and greater life, then all these things assume quite a different perspective. We know then that progress is absolutely certain. A man may stumble, he may set himself against the forces of progress, but he will be carried on by them in spite of himself, though when he resists there will be much of bruising and trouble for him. We see at once that this knowledge eliminates fear. The so-called loss of a loved one by death is really only a temporary absence, and not even that as soon as a man develops the power to see on the higher planes. Those whom we think we have lost are with us still, even though with our physical eyes we cannot see them. And we should never forget that, although we may sometimes be under the delusion that we have lost them, they are not in the least under the delusion that they have lost us, because they can still see our astral bodies. And as soon as we leave the physical vehicle in sleep we are with them and can communicate with them exactly as when they were on the physical plane. We need not worry ourselves about saving our souls, rather on the other hand, as a theosophical writer once said, we may not be entirely beyond the hope that some day our souls may save us. There is no soul to be saved in the ordinary sense in which the words are used, because we ourselves are the souls, and furthermore there is nothing to be saved from except our own error and ignorance. The body is nothing but a vestment, and when it is worn out we cast it aside. Cooperation. It is part of the scheme of the Logos that at a certain stage in its evolution humanity must begin to guide itself. Therefore all the future Buddhas, Manas and Adepts will be members of our own humanity, the lords from Venus having gone on to other worlds. Therefore also the Logos actually counts upon us all, upon you and upon me. We may have 99 faults and only one virtue, but if that one virtue is needed in a theosophical work, and what virtue is not needed, we shall surely have the opportunity to use it. We should then value our co-workers for what they can do, and not be constantly blaming them for what they cannot do. Many people have earned the right to do some particular kind of work, notwithstanding that their defects may be greater than their virtue. People often make a sad mistake in comparing their work with that of others, and wishing that they had the same opportunities. The truth is that each one has his own gifts and his own powers, and it is not expected of any man that he should do as much as some other man, but only that he should do his best, just his own best. The Master once said that in reality there are only two classes of men, those who know and those who do not know. Those who know are they that have seen the light and have turned towards it, through whatever religion they have come, at however great a distance from the light they may as yet find themselves. Many of them may be suffering much in their struggle towards that light, but at least they have hope before them, and while we sympathize deeply with them and strive to help them, we yet realize that they are by no means in the worst case. The people really to be pitied are those who are quite indifferent to all higher thought, those who do not struggle because they do not care, or think, or know that there is anything for which to strive. These are they in truth who constitute the great orphan humanity. A day of life. It is not wise to specialize beyond a certain point, because one can never really get to the end of any subject, and it tends more and more to narrow the mind and the outlook, to produce a one-sided and distorted development, and to cause one to view everything out of its due proportion. We are in the habit of thinking of a lifetime as a long period, but really it is only a day in greater life. You cannot finish a really great piece of work in one day. It may need many days, and the work of one particular day may at the time show no appreciable result. But nevertheless every day's work is necessary to the completion of the great task, and if a man should idle day after day because the completion of the work seems so far off, he would certainly not succeed in getting it done. There are many to whom theosophy comes late in life, who feel themselves somewhat discouraged by the outlook, thinking they are too old now to take themselves in hand seriously or to do any valuable work. That the best that they can do now is to go quietly on to the end of this incarnation in the hope that they may have a better opportunity in the next. This is a sad mistake, and that for various reasons. You do not know what kind of incarnation karma is preparing for you next time you return to earth. You do not know whether by any previous action you have deserved the opportunity of being born into theosophical surroundings. In any case, the most likely way to secure such a birth is to make use of the opportunity which has come to you now, for, of all that we have learned about the working of this great law of cause and effect, this one fact stands out most clearly, that the result of taking an opportunity is invariably that another and wider opportunity is given. If therefore you neglect the opportunity put before you by your encounter with theosophy now, it is possible that in the next incarnation the chance may not come to you again. If a man sets to work earnestly and permeates his spirit as thoroughly as possible with theosophical ideas, that will build them well into the ego, and will give him so great an attraction towards them that he is certain, even though he may not remember them in detail, to seek for them instinctively, and to recognize them, in his next birth. Every man therefore should begin theosophical work just as soon as he hears of it, because whatever of it he contrives to achieve, however little it may be, will be just so much to the good. And he will begin tomorrow where he has left off this time. Also by trying to do what he can with such vehicles as he has, obstinate and unresponsive though they may prove through lack of pliability, he will assuredly do much to earn for himself more pliable vehicles for next time. So no effort is lost, and it is never too late in any given life to enter upon the long, long upward path, and to make a commencement in the glorious work of helping others. With an eternal life before us, it would be a mistake to worry because the present day is drawing near its evening, or in despair to neglect the preparations for the coming day. Light on the Path says, "Kill out desire of life." This is often misunderstood, but its meaning should be plain. You cannot lose your life, why then should you desire it? It cannot possibly be taken from you. At the same time, the quotation means that you should kill out desire for particular bodily conditions. Meditation. I think that our members sometimes mistake with regard to meditation, because they have not thoroughly understood the exact way in which it works. They sometimes think that because they do not feel happy and uplifted after a meditation it is therefore a failure and entirely useless, or they find themselves dull and heavy and incapable of meditation. There seems no reality in anything for them, no certainty about anything, and they feel that they are making no progress. They suppose that this must be somehow their own fault and they reproach themselves for it. But they often ask what they can do to improve matters and to restore the joy they used to feel. Now the fact is that experience in regard to meditation is that of all seekers after the spiritual life. You will find that the Christian saints constantly speak of their sufferings at periods of what they call spiritual dryness, when nothing seems any use and they feel as though they had lost sight of God altogether. Imagine that I am sitting looking through a wide-open window upon a beautiful hillside, but the sky is dull gray, heavy with a vast pall of could probably miles in thickness. I have not seen the sun for 3 days. I cannot feel his rays, but I know he is there, and I know that some day these clouds will roll away as others have done, and I shall see him again. What is necessary for the life of the world is that he should be there, not that I should see him. It is far pleasanter to see him and to feel the warmth of his rays, but it is not a necessity of life. I know just exactly how these people feel, and it is cold comfort to be told that our feelings do not matter, even though there is a very real sense in which it is true. I think it is helpful to remember that our meditation has several objects, for example. 1. To ensure that, however deeply we may be immersed in the affairs of the world, we shall devote at least some time each day to the thought of a high ideal. 2. To draw us nearer to the Master and to the Logos, so that from them strength may be poured upon us and through us to benefit the world. 3. To train our higher bodies, so that they may have constant practice in responding to the highest vibration, to do the same thing for them that a carefully arranged system of gymnastics or regular exercises does for the physical body. Now you will observe that all these objects are attained just the same whether we feel happy or not. A mistake that many people make is to suppose that a meditation which is unsatisfactory to them is therefore ineffectual. It is just like a little child performing daily her hour of practice upon the piano. Sometimes perhaps she partially enjoys it, but very often it is a weariness to her, and her only thought is to finish it as quickness to her, and her only thought is to finish it as quickly as possible. She does not know, but we do, that every such hour is accustoming her fingers to the instrument, and is bringing nearer and nearer the time when she will derive from her music an enjoyment of which now she does not even dream. You will observe that this object is being attained just as much by the unpleasant and unsatisfactory hour of practice as by that which she enjoys. So in the work of our meditation sometimes we feel happy and uplifted, and sometimes not. But in both cases alike it has been acting for our higher bodies as do the exercises of physical culture or training for our physical body. It is pleasanter when you have what you call a good meditation. But the only difference between what seems a good one and a bad one lies in its effect upon the feelings, and not in the real work which it does towards our evolution. The reason of the temporary dullness is not always in ourselves, or rather, it is not always attributable to anything that can reasonably be called our fault. Often it is purely physical, resulting from overfatigue or a nervous strain. Often it is due to surrounding astral or mental influences. Of course it is our karma to be subjected to these, and so in that more remote way we are responsible. But we must just do the best we can with them, and there is no need for us to be despondent, or to waste our time in reproaching ourselves. Another reason also may be that at certain times the planetary influences are more favorable for meditation than at others. I know nothing of this myself, for I have never considered the planetary influences in these matters, but have always forced my way to what I desired. But I have heard a friend say that an astrologer told him that on certain occasions when Jupiter had certain relations with the moon this had the effect of expanding the etheric atmosphere and making meditation easier. Or at least making it appear more successful. The astrologer gave him a list, which he consulted after taking notes of the conditions of his meditations daily for 3 or 4 weeks, when he found that the results exactly agreed with the influences which were said to be acting. Certain aspects with Saturn, on the other hand, were said to congest the etheric atmosphere, making the work of meditation difficult, and this also was verified in the same way. The highest thought that we can have is that of the Supreme Lord of all, but of course we must not suppose that our thought changes in the least the attitude of the Supreme towards us. We who are students ought to be far beyond the stage at which a man thinks that he can produce change in the Supreme, a thought which belongs only to the ignorant and unphilosophical among the Christians. We ourselves, however, are certainly affected by opening ourselves to him. If you open the window of your room to the sun, the condition of your room is much changed by the power of the sun, but the sun is no way changed by your opening the window. Open the windows of your soul to God. During meditation one may try to think of the Supreme Self in everything and everything in it. Try to understand how the Self is endeavoring to express itself through the form. One method of practice for this is to try to identify your consciousness with that of various creatures, such as a fly, an ant, or a tree. Try to see and feel things as they see and feel them, until as you pass inwards all consciousness of the tree or the insect falls away, and the life of the Logos appears. We are very much more than the tree or the ant. Therefore there is no danger of our being unable to withdraw our consciousness when the experiment is finished. We do not after all imprison it in the form of the tree or the ant, we expand it to take in the life in every form. The man who does this for the first time is usually surprised when he realizes the limitations under which animals act. He had thought an animal acted in a certain way for what seemed quite obvious reasons, but when he really enters into the animal he finds that its motives and intentions are wholly different. The disciple has to go through this process also with lower classes of human beings, because without it he could not perfectly help them. This enables us to get down to the bedrock of the self, and clears away the darkness and loneliness which often comes over us at one stage of our progress. When we know quite certainly that we are part of a whole we do not so much mind where this particular fragment of it may be, or through what experiences it may be passing. Whatever loneliness we may have, we feel, we know, that we are never alone. The Master is always there waiting to help where help is possible. We must give up the clinging to the particular forms, and have no motive but to do the will of the Logos. We must never allow the feeling of loneliness to make us forget the Master or lose faith in him, for no progress is possible unless we have the fullest confidence in the Master whom we choose to serve. If we have only a half-hearted questioning faith in him we cannot progress. We need not make the choice of Master unless we will, but having made it we must have faith in the teacher and his message. In controlling the mind first turn away the senses from outward sounds and sights, and become insensitive to the waves of thought and emotion from others. That is comparatively easy, but the next stage is very difficult, for when this is done there come up from within disturbances which spring from the uncontrolled activity of the mind. The meditation of many of our beginners consists mostly of a continuous struggle to come back to the point. Here comes in the advice given in the voice of silence. The mind is the slayer of the real, let the disciple slay the slayer. You must not of course destroy your mind, for you cannot get along without it, but you must dominate it, it is yours, not you. The best way to overcome its wandering is to use the will. It is often suggested that the pupil should help himself by making a shell round him, but after all shells are but crutches. Develop will, and you will be able to dispense with them. The astral body tries to impose itself upon you in the same way, and to make you believe that its desires are yours, but with that also we must deal in a precisely similar manner. There is no limit to the degree to which will may be developed. There are decided limitations to the extent to which the strength of the physical body can be increased, but there seem to be no limitations in the case of the will. Fortunately we can train it in the ordinary small things of daily life every day and all day long, and we can have no better practice than this. It is much easier for a man to screw up his courage to face a dramatic martyrdom before a crowd of people than to go on doing the tiresome daily duty with tiresome people day after day and year after year. This latter needs much more willpower than the former. Be careful however that you do not make others suffer in your efforts to develop your own will. Sometimes people have shown willpower by leaving home and friends and going out to face all kinds of difficulties and privations in order to do theosophical work. That is quite right if a man is absolutely free to do it. But a man who left his wife and family for that purpose, or an only son who left parents that were dependent upon him, would evidently be neglecting his duty in a way which no one has a right to do, even for the sake of the noblest motives. As a result of determined meditation we begin to build into our bodies the higher kinds of matter. At this stage we often feel grand emotions, coming from the Buddhic level and reflected in the astral body, and under their influence we may do fine work and show great self-sacrifice. But then is needed the development of the mental and causal bodies in order to steady and balance us. Otherwise the grand emotions that have swayed us in the right direction may very readily become a little twisted and sway us along some other and less desirable lines. With feeling alone we never obtain perfect balance or steadiness. It is well that the high feelings should come, and the more powerfully they come the better, but that is not enough. Wisdom and steadiness must also be acquired because we need directing power as well as motive force. The very meaning of Buddhic is wisdom, and when that comes it swallows up all else. Illumination may mean three quite different things. First, a man, by setting himself to think intensely and very carefully over a subject may arrive at some conclusion with respect to it. Secondly, he may hope to obtain some illumination from his higher self, to discover what the ego really thinks on its own plane about the matter in question. Thirdly, a highly developed man may come into touch with masters or devas. It is only in the first case that his conclusions would be likely to be vitiated by his thought forms. The higher self would be able to transcend these, and so would a master or a deva. All these would have no difficulty in presenting things as they really are. But we must remember that we have not only to absorb the information, but also to bring it down into the physical brain, and as soon as it reaches that brain it will begin to be colored by prejudices. What we can do in meditation depends upon what we are doing all day long. If we have built up prejudices in ordinary life we cannot escape from them during the time of meditation. But if we patiently endeavor to root out our prejudices and to learn that the ways of others are just as good as our own, we are at least on our way towards establishing a gentle and tolerant attitude which will assuredly extend itself to the special time of our meditation. It is easy for us to see the disadvantages of any new ideas or suggestions, these leap to the eyes. But look for the good also, which does not always so readily emerge. During meditation the ego regards the personality much as at any other time, he is slightly contemptuous usually. Remember your physical meditation is not for the ego, but for the training of the various vehicles to be a channel for the ego. If the ego is at all developed he will meditate also upon his own level, but it does not follow that his meditation will synchronize with that of the personality. The force coming down is always that of the ego, but only a small part,